Some places weren't lost over time. They were meant to slip out of memory, not abandoned in a moment but slowly set aside, hidden by distance, by silence, and by the passing of generations. Tonight we'll spend some time with one of those places, an ancient temple designed to be forgotten, and the quiet clues that suggest its absence may have been part of its purpose all along. Here on Made for Sleep, this story has been carefully researched and assembled by our team, drawing from historical context and interpretations, then shaped into a slower, more restful listening experience. Let the fire burn low beside you, and if you're still here, you can share how you're doing and what time it is where you are. Good evening, my sleepy scholars. Tonight, we're slipping into the quiet shadows of a structure that time tried to erase, not through catastrophe, but through something far more subtle. What follows is a slow wander through stone corridors and forgotten courtyards, where archaeology meets stillness, and every answer raises 3 more questions. The clearing wasn't here 200 years ago. The forest pulled back gradually, roots shifting and canopy thinning in slow motion, until pale limestone emerged from the undergrowth. A low wall, maybe waist height. The stone is soft enough that centuries of rain have rounded its edges into something almost organic, like bone left in moving water. No inscription, no marker, just stone arranged with clear intention, though the intention itself remains unclear. The wall curves gently to the left, disappearing into a tangle of wild fig trees whose roots have begun the patient work of pulling the structure apart. One section has already collapsed, the stones lying in a neat tumble that speaks to how carefully they were originally fitted together. No mortar, just weight and friction, and the kind of craftsmanship that assumes permanence, even when permanence turns out to be negotiable. Following the curve of the wall means stepping over roots that have broken through the ground in thick coils. The air here is different, cooler. It carries the smell of wet stone and decomposing leaves, that particular scent of places where sunlight arrives filtered and indirect. Overhead, the canopy is dense enough to create a kind of green twilight, even though it's mid-afternoon. The temperature drop is noticeable, maybe 5 degrees, maybe more. The wall leads to an entrance, though calling it that feels too formal. It's a gap, a deliberate gap framed by 2 larger stones that once held something vertical. Wooden posts, probably, long since rotted away. The gap is wide enough for one person to pass through comfortably, narrow enough that 2 would have to turn sideways. There's a practicality to that, a quiet control over who enters and how quickly. Stepping through means the light changes again, dimmer now. The walls on either side rise higher than they appeared from outside, maybe 12 feet, creating a corridor that runs straight ahead for 30 paces before turning sharply to the right. The floor is paved with flat stones, fitted so tightly that almost no soil has worked its way between them, even after all this time. Someone swept this path. Someone kept it clear. The stones show wear in the centre, a shallow groove where countless feet passed in the same direction, always favouring the middle of the path. The turn reveals a courtyard, small and square, open to the sky. The walls here are more intact, rising to perhaps 15 feet, though the top courses have crumbled in places, leaving gaps like missing teeth. In the centre of the courtyard sits a shallow depression, circular, maybe 6 feet across. It's lined with the same pale limestone, and at its deepest point, which is only about 8 inches down, there's a small hole, perfectly round, drilled straight through the rock. A drain, most likely, which means the depression held liquid at some point. Water, probably, though the chemistry of the stone would require testing to confirm what flowed through here, and for how long. The limestone around the hole shows slight discoloration, a pale rust orange that suggests iron content in whatever passed through. Not unusual. Most groundwater carries trace minerals, and over centuries those traces accumulate into visible stains. Crouching beside the depression means running your hand along its edge. The stone is smooth, but not polished. Worn, rather than worked. There's a difference in texture between stone that's been deliberately buffed and stone that's been touched by thousands of hands over long periods of time. This is the latter, the kind of smoothness that comes from repetition rather than intention. The courtyard walls are plain, no carvings, no decorative elements, just stone stacked with care, each course level, each stone chosen for how it fits against its neighbours. It's the kind of construction that speaks to resources, both material and human, but not necessarily to wealth. Limestone was local here. The quarries were probably within a day's walk. The labour was significant but not extraordinary. This wasn't a project that required enslaved workers or conscripted armies. It was careful work done by people who knew stone and had time to do it properly. 3 doorways lead off the courtyard, each identical in size and placement, each framed by slightly larger stones that create a subtle visual distinction without breaking the overall simplicity. The doorways are dark. The interior spaces don't catch much light, and what little enters doesn't penetrate far. Choosing the nearest one means ducking slightly as you pass through, though the clearance is actually generous, maybe 7 feet. It's the darkness that makes you hunch. Inside, the temperature drops again. The air is still and dense with that particular quiet that comes from thick walls and no windows. Eyes adjust slowly to the dimness. The space is rectangular, maybe 20 feet deep and 12 wide. The walls are unadorned. The floor is the same tightly fitted stone as the courtyard. At the far end, set into the wall at chest height, there's a niche. Square. Perhaps 2 feet on each side. Deep enough that you can't see the back without leaning in. The niche is empty now, but the stone inside shows the same kind of wear as the courtyard depression. Smooth, touched, used. Whatever sat here was handled, removed, replaced, handled again. The bottom of the niche has a slight hollow in the centre, as though something round rested there for a very long time. Long enough to leave an impression in stone that's theoretically too hard for that kind of casual erosion. Stepping back means letting your eyes trace the walls. There are no marks, no soot stains from torches, no graffiti from later visitors, no Christian crosses carved over pagan symbols, no Islamic inscriptions replacing earlier iconography. Nothing that suggests this space was ever repurposed or reinterpreted by subsequent occupants. It simply was, and then it wasn't, and then the forest moved in. The other 2 rooms are nearly identical, same dimensions, same niche placement, same worn floors and unmarked walls. The only variation is in the degree of collapse. One room has lost part of its roof, the stones lying in a careful pile inside, as though they fell in slow motion and landed with consideration. The 3rd room is fully intact, the roof formed by large limestone slabs laid across the walls, each slab supporting the next in a corbelled arch that requires no keystone and distributes weight in a way that's proven remarkably durable. Returning to the courtyard means the light feels almost bright after the interior dimness. The sky visible through the opening is pale blue, cloudless, the kind of flat light that comes late in the afternoon when the sun has started its descent, but hasn't yet begun to paint things gold. Sitting on the edge of the depression, back to one wall, invites consideration of what you're looking at. This place is a temple, probably. The architecture suggests ritual use. The courtyard, the niches, the careful symmetry. But it's a temple without obvious deities, no statues, no altars in the traditional sense. No inscriptions invoking specific gods or recording specific offerings. It's functionally anonymous, which is unusual. Most temples advertise their purpose. They want you to know who's being honoured and who did the honouring and how generous the donors were. This one stays quiet. The archaeological term for this kind of site is ambiguous sacred space, which is pleasantly honest about the limits of interpretation. Sacred, probably. Space, definitely. Ambiguous, absolutely. The challenge isn't determining whether people use this place for ritual purposes. The wear patterns suggest repeated, formalised behaviour. The challenge is determining which rituals, honouring which beliefs, and why those beliefs apparently left no written record. One theory, advanced by researchers working in similar sites across the eastern Mediterranean, suggests that some temples were deliberately constructed without identifying markers because the practices they housed were either too common to require explanation or too esoteric to permit it. If everyone in the community knows which god lives here and what offerings are appropriate, why bother carving it in stone? And if the knowledge is restricted to a small group of initiates, why make it public? Another theory focuses on the transition periods. When cultures shift, through migration, conquest, trade, or simple evolution, the sacred spaces of the old system often undergo transformation. Sometimes they're violently destroyed, sometimes they're repurposed, sometimes they're just quietly abandoned, left to weather and time because the new system has its own temples and no particular need for the old ones. This place might represent that kind of peaceful obsolescence, not destroyed, not forbidden, just no longer necessary. A third interpretation, more speculative but worth considering, suggests that certain sites were designed from the beginning to be temporary, that the structures themselves were permanent, but the practices they housed were intended to last only as long as a specific generation or purpose required. Build in stone so it can be used properly while needed. Abandon it cleanly when it's not. Let the forest have it back. This interpretation struggles with the question of effort. Why build so carefully for temporary use? But it accounts for the lack of later modification. If the abandonment was intentional and complete, there would be no reason for subsequent groups to interact with the site at all. Standing means brushing limestone dust from your hands. The sun has moved while you've been sitting. The courtyard is now half in shadow, the light dividing it diagonally, creating a gradient from brightness to dusk. The shadows make the doorways darker, the interior rooms fully opaque now, though they're empty. Beyond the courtyard, through the entrance corridor, the forest is beginning its evening shift. The bird calls change. Afternoon species settling in, evening species starting up. The temperature is dropping, subtle but steady, and the air is picking up moisture as the day's warmth releases its hold on the canopy. It'll be cool tonight. Not cold, but cool enough that the stone will feel genuinely cold by morning. Walking back through the corridor, through the entrance gap, means standing again at the low outer wall. From here, looking back, the structure almost disappears. The stone is the same colour as the limestone outcroppings that appear throughout this region. The walls are low enough that they blend into the landscape. The forest has draped itself around the site in a way that suggests integration rather than invasion. If you didn't know the temple was here, you could walk within 20 feet of it and see nothing but trees and rock and the ordinary disorder of an unmanaged forest floor. That's the thing about forgetting. It doesn't require drama. It doesn't need fire or conquest or deliberate erasure. It just needs time and a shift in relevance. People stop coming. The paths grow over. The forest fills in. Within 3 generations, nobody remembers why there was ever a clearing here. Within 5, the clearing itself is gone. Within 10, the stories have simplified into vague references to old places in the forest, places the grandparents mentioned but couldn't quite locate anymore. The archaeological record is full of these sites, not dramatic ruins, not legendary lost cities, just places that were used and then weren't, and which managed to hold their shape long enough for later people to stumble across them and wonder what they were for. The wondering is often more interesting than the answers, partly because the answers are usually incomplete, and partly because the act of wondering connects you to the original builders in a way that facts alone don't manage. They stood here too, chose these stones, fitted them together, walked these paths, touched these walls, poured liquid into that depression and watched it drain away, placed objects in those niches and removed them again, performed whatever rituals made sense to them, in whatever configuration felt appropriate, for whatever purposes seemed pressing at the time. And then they stopped. Not because they were forced to, probably, just because circumstances changed and the temple no longer fit those circumstances. Following the curve of the outer wall as it disappears into the fig trees means noticing the remarkable work the roots have done here. They've lifted entire sections of the wall, tilting the stones at angles that should have caused collapse but somehow haven't. The stones lean against the roots, and the roots wrap around the stones, and the whole arrangement has achieved a kind of equilibrium that's probably temporary but has already lasted longer than most modern construction. The wall ends at a corner, where it meets another wall running perpendicular. This one is taller, maybe 8 feet, and in better condition. The stones here are larger, more carefully dressed, fitted so precisely that you can barely slide a piece of paper between them. Someone spent time on this section. Someone cared about getting it exactly right. The perpendicular wall leads to another entrance, smaller than the first, only wide enough for a single person. Beyond it, there's another courtyard, larger than the first, with what appears to be a series of low platforms arranged in a semicircle. The platforms are made of stacked stone, each one about knee-height, each one supporting a flat capstone that's been polished smooth. Stepping through the entrance into the larger courtyard means the light is different again, softer somehow, filtered through a gap in the canopy that creates a focused beam of late afternoon sun. The beam hits the centre platform directly, illuminating the polished capstone until it glows pale gold. It's beautiful. It's also probably coincidental. The canopy shifts with the seasons, and the gap that exists now might not have existed when this place was in use. But it's tempting to think otherwise. Tempting to imagine that the builders positioned these platforms with exactly this kind of solar alignment in mind, that they calculated angles and cleared specific trees and created a moment of illumination that marked a particular time of day or season. The problem with that interpretation is the lack of supporting evidence. Solar alignments in ancient architecture are notoriously difficult to prove unless they're extremely precise or well documented. A beam of light hitting a stone platform could be intentional design or pure chance, and without written records or comparative examples, it's impossible to say which. The safer approach is to note the alignment, document it, measure it, compare it to known solar patterns, and remain agnostic about intent. Walking to the centre platform, the one catching the light, means feeling the capstone smooth under your hand, cool despite the sun. The stone is marble this time, not limestone. White marble with pale grey veining, polished to a finish that still shows quality even after centuries of weathering. Marble isn't local. The nearest quarries are 2 days' walk to the east, in the mountains. Bringing marble here would have required effort, planning, probably some kind of wheeled transport. It's a statement. Not a loud one, but a statement nonetheless. This platform mattered more than the others. The other platforms, 5 of them arranged in a careful arc, are topped with the same pale limestone as the rest of the structure. Polished? Yes, but not to the same degree. Smooth enough for function, not smooth enough for display. The difference is subtle but deliberate. Someone made a choice here. Someone decided that one platform would receive special treatment and the others would not. Why? The obvious answer is hierarchy. One god or ritual or purpose ranked higher than the others, received better materials, occupied the position of honour. But hierarchy implies documentation. Kings and priests and dominant deities like to advertise their dominance. They like inscriptions and statues and architectural flourishes that leave no doubt about the pecking order. This setup is quieter. It suggests distinction without insisting on it. Sitting on the edge of the marble platform, feet on the ground, hands on the smooth stone means watching the sun beam move. In 10 minutes, it'll have shifted off the platform entirely, and the courtyard will return to the green-tinged dimness that seems to be this site's default state. Watching solar movement made visible like this is hypnotic, seeing the geometry of planetary rotation translated into a slow sweep of light across ancient stone. The forest around is settling into evening mode. The bird calls have changed again. A few cicadas have started up, that rhythmic pulse that sounds like the forest itself breathing. The air is definitely cooler now, and you can smell night coming. That combination of dropping temperature and rising moisture that happens in the hour before sunset in heavily forested areas. It's pleasant. The kind of evening that makes you want to sit still and let the day finish its business without your input. Behind, through a gap in the wall, another structure is visible, smaller, lower, almost entirely overgrown. Just the top edge of what might be a roof, poking through a dense mat of vegetation that's wrapped the whole thing in green. Standing, leaving the platform and pushing through the gap reveals more. The structure is a single room, maybe 10 feet square, with walls that barely rise above ground level. The roof is still intact, surprisingly, formed by a single massive stone slab that must weigh several tons. How they moved it into place is unclear. Levers and ramps, probably. Patient work by people who understood forces and friction, and the stubborn physics of heavy objects. The slab sits perfectly level, supported by the 4 walls, creating a space underneath that's dark and cool and completely protected from the weather. Kneeling at the entrance, a low opening on the east side just tall enough to crawl through, means peering into complete darkness. Eyes wait to adjust, but there's not enough light for adjustment to help. A torch would be needed, or a flashlight, or to come back at midday when the sun is high enough to send some reflected light through the entrance. Instead, sitting outside the entrance, back against the wall, invites consideration of what this small structure might have been. Storage, possibly. Ritual isolation, maybe. A place for offerings to be left and retrieved. A location for specific ceremonies that require darkness or enclosure. Or simply a convenient spot to keep tools and materials out of the rain. Without excavation, without careful analysis of soil composition and artifact distribution, it's just a dark room under a heavy stone. The light is fading quickly now. The sun has dropped below the tree line and the canopy's filtering out what little light remains. The courtyard behind is in full shadow. The forest around is shifting into its night configuration. Different sounds, different movements, different rules. Heading back makes sense. The path taken to get here is clear enough, and there are maybe 20 minutes before the darkness becomes problematic. But there's something compelling about this place at dusk. The way the stone absorbs the last light. The way the temperature drop makes the air feel thick and present. The way the forest sounds close in, becoming more immediate and less like background noise. It's not threatening, it's just attentive. The forest paying attention to itself, to the night arriving, to the shift in conditions that requires adjustment. Standing means brushing dirt from clothes. The walk back to the first courtyard takes longer than expected. The light is worse than anticipated, and moving carefully to avoid roots and uneven ground is necessary. By the time the entrance corridor is reached, full dark has arrived. The sky visible through the courtyard opening is deep blue, not quite black, with the first stars showing faintly in the clearest patches. Standing in the courtyard for a moment means letting eyes adapt to the darkness. The stone walls are barely visible, just darker shapes against the dark forest. The depression in the centre is invisible. You know where it is, but you can't see it. The doorways to the 3 rooms are completely black, 3 rectangles of absence leading to spaces you can't penetrate visually. There's something primally unsettling about being in an ancient structure in full darkness. The rational mind knows it's just stone and forest and night, that there's nothing here that wasn't here in daylight. But the older parts of the brain, the parts that evolved when night meant danger and enclosed spaces meant ambush, are less convinced. They want movement. They want the open, where threats can be seen coming. Compromise comes from sitting against the courtyard wall, back protected, eyes on the entrance corridor. The stone is cold now, genuinely cold, pulling heat through clothes. Above, the stars are becoming more distinct. Enough light pollution exists even in this remote area that the Milky Way isn't clearly visible, but the major constellations are. Orion, the Pleiades, Cassiopeia. The same stars the builders saw, arranged in the same patterns, following the same paths across the same sky. That's one of the stranger aspects of archaeology. The structures change, the languages change, the beliefs and practices and entire civilizations change. But the sky doesn't. The stars that guided ancient navigators guide modern GPS satellites. The planets that ancient astrologers tracked still follow the same orbits. The moon that determined ancient calendars still pulls the same tides. There's a continuity there that's both comforting and slightly unnerving. Closing your eyes means listening to the forest. The cicadas have stopped. The night birds have started. Something small is moving through the underbrush, making soft rustling sounds that travel in fits and starts. Probably a rodent, possibly a small reptile. Definitely something that doesn't consider you a threat. The sounds come closer, past the entrance corridor, continue into the distance. The question of why this temple was abandoned keeps circling back. The physical evidence suggests no disaster, no fire damage, no earthquake collapse, no evidence of looting or vandalism. The site was simply left. People stopped coming. The niches emptied, the depression dried, the paths grew over, and nobody bothered to record why. That absence of explanation is itself interesting. Most major transitions in ancient cultures leave some kind of documentary trail. Inscriptions announcing new cults, declarations banning old practices, legal records transferring temple property to new owners. Something. The silence around this site suggests either that the transition was too mundane to document, people just drifted away over time, or that the documentation existed but hasn't survived. Paper decays, parchment decays, wood decays, even stone inscriptions erode. The survival of ancient records is largely accidental, dependent on factors like climate, soil chemistry, and whether later people decided the inscriptions were worth preserving. Most ancient writing is gone. What remains is a tiny biased sample that probably doesn't represent the full range of what was originally recorded. So the silence might not mean anything, or it might mean everything. Without context, it's impossible to say. Opening your eyes means the courtyard is still dark. The stars are brighter now, sharp points in the deep blue space above the walls. Eyes have adapted enough that general shapes are visible. The walls, the entrance, the depression, but not details. It's the kind of darkness where you know where things are because you remember, not because you can see. Standing up requires effort. The cold stone has stiffened muscles, and your back protests as you straighten. Making your way to the entrance corridor by feel and memory, one hand on the wall, feet testing each step before committing weight. The corridor feels longer in the dark. The turn comes as a surprise, even though you knew it was there. Outside, beyond the outer wall, the forest is fully engaged with the night. The sounds are different out here, louder, more varied. An owl calls from somewhere to the left, a descending sequence of hoots that sounds both closer and farther away than it probably is. Something larger moves through the underbrush, making no attempt at stealth. Deer, maybe, or wild boar. The footsteps are heavy, quadrupedal, unconcerned, finding a spot near the outer wall where the ground is relatively flat and the vegetation has been kept down by foot traffic. Probably from archaeologists or tourists, though there's no sign of recent visitors. Means sitting with back against stone, legs stretched out, letting the night settle around you. The temperature is still dropping. It'll probably bottom out around 3 in the morning, then start climbing again toward dawn. Right now, it's pleasant. Cool enough to be comfortable, not cold enough to be uncomfortable. The stone behind is radiating cold, but slowly, and body heat creates a thin buffer zone that keeps things tolerable. Thinking about the people who built this place doesn't require drama or romance, just practicality. They had the same basic challenges. Stay warm, stay fed, stay safe, make meaning, connect with something larger than immediate survival. The specific forms those challenges took were different. Their threats were different, their resources were different, their understanding of how the world worked was different. But the fundamental drives were probably similar. They built a temple because that made sense to them. It addressed a need, or fulfilled a purpose, or satisfied a requirement that their culture considered important. They used the materials available to them, applied the techniques they knew, created a structure that worked for what they wanted to do. And then, when circumstances changed, they stopped using it. Not because they were forced to, just because it no longer served its purpose. There's no tragedy in that. No loss that requires mourning. Things change, uses change, needs change. The temple did its job for as long as it was needed, and then it became something else. A ruin, a curiosity, a puzzle for later people to consider. That's a normal progression. Expecting permanence from human structures is the strange perspective, not accepting their eventual obsolescence. The owl calls again, closer this time. The sound moves through the forest, bouncing off trees, absorbed by foliage, arriving from multiple directions at once. The forest is a complicated acoustic environment. Sounds don't travel in straight lines. They reflect and refract and interfere with each other in ways that make directional identification difficult. The owl could be 50 feet away or 200 feet away, and knowing which base solely on what you hear would be difficult. Above, a satellite crosses the sky, a steady point of light moving against the stellar background, probably in low Earth orbit, probably one of the communication or observation platforms that now circle the planet in their hundreds. The ancient builders didn't have satellites. They had stars and planets, and the occasional comet, and those were mysterious enough to generate entire cosmologies. Now the sky's full of human objects, and most people couldn't name 3 constellations if asked. The irony isn't lost. Sitting at a forgotten temple, thinking about how cultures change and knowledge gets lost, while a satellite, which most people couldn't explain the purpose of, passes overhead. Every generation forgets what the previous generation knew. Every generation learns things the previous generation couldn't imagine. The process is neutral, not good or bad, just constant. Eyes are getting heavy. The combination of cool air, darkness and stillness is triggering sleep responses. Moving would probably be wise, heading back to wherever actual shelter and warmth and something approaching comfort wait. But there's a strange appeal to the idea of sleeping here, against this wall, under these stars, in this place that was designed for purposes not fully understood. That won't happen, of course. Equipment is lacking. Sleeping bag, ground pad, any of the gear that would make a night outside tolerable. And there are practical considerations, weather changes, animal encounters, morning stiffness that would make hiking out unpleasant. But the appeal is there anyway. The impulse to stay, to spend a full night cycle in this space, to see what the temple looks like in the grey light of dawn. Instead, staying just a bit longer works as compromise. Just until eyes close on their own. Just until the cold becomes uncomfortable rather than refreshing. Just until the forest shifts again, into whatever configuration it adopts in the dead hours of night. The wall behind is radiating steady cold now. The buffer zone body heat created has collapsed, and the chill is working through clothes, finding skin, beginning the process of heat extraction that, if allowed to continue, would eventually become dangerous. But not yet. Not close. Just cold enough to notice, which is different from cold enough to worry. The stars are as bright as they're going to get. The moon hasn't risen yet, it won't for another few hours, and the sky has that deep, clear quality that only comes in moonless nights far from city lights. Structure is visible in the darkness now. Variations in density. Patches of lighter and darker. The forest canopy creating patterns against the star field. A bat flickers past so fast it's almost missed. Then another. Then a third. They're working the area above the temple, probably drawn by the insect activity that concentrates around stone structures. Bats are good at what they do. They navigate by sound, building a real-time map of their environment from the echoes of their own ultrasonic calls. To them, the temple probably looks entirely different than it does to human eyes. They see the acoustic structure, the way sound bounces off walls, the interference patterns created by the courtyard geometry, the echo signature of the entrance corridor. Wondering what the builders would make of that is tempting. Whether they'd be pleased that their structure still serves a purpose, even if that purpose is just providing good bat hunting. Whether they'd see continuity in that, or whether they'd consider it irrelevant. Bats don't worship. Bats don't perform rituals. Bats just hunt insects and roost and raise their young and do the things bats do. If the temple helps with that, the temple is useful. If not, it's just obstacles. Breathing has slowed, deepened, the rhythm of the body settling into rest mode, even though sitting up and not particularly comfortable. It's a peaceful state, not sleep, but adjacent to sleep. That floating zone where thoughts drift and time becomes negotiable, and the boundary between internal and external gets blurry. The niches in the small rooms come to mind, what might have sat in them. Statues probably, or relics, or offerings, or texts. Something that mattered enough to justify the careful construction of the storage space. Something that was removed carefully when the temple was abandoned, taken to wherever the community went next, or distributed among the members, or buried somewhere for safekeeping. Or maybe nothing was removed. Maybe the niches were always empty, designed as spaces where specific energies or presences could collect. Some belief systems don't require physical objects. They work with absences and intentions and the arrangement of space itself. An empty niche could be as functionally sacred as a filled one, depending on what you believe about how sacred spaces operate. The cold is becoming more insistent. The stone wall is now actively pulling heat from the body, and muscles are starting to tighten in response. Time to move. Time to stand up, shake off the stiffness, and start the walk back to actual civilization. Standing slowly gives joints time to adjust. Back pops in 3 places, knees complain, shoulders remind you that sitting against cold stone for extended periods is not what they were designed for. But everything works. Everything moves. Fine. The walk back through the forest is dark but manageable. Eyes have adapted fully now, and enough is visible to avoid the major obstacles. The path taken to get here is still visible, marked by disturbed leaves and bent vegetation. Following it in reverse, moving carefully, letting feet find stable ground before shifting weight. The forest at night is its own world. The day species are asleep. The night species are active. The rules have changed. The sounds have changed. Even the smells are different. Night blooming flowers releasing their fragrance. Nocturnal fungi exhaling spores. The forest itself breathing in a different rhythm. Reaching the edge of the forest where it meets the road means the contrast is sharp. Behind, darkness and organic chaos, and the slow processes of growth and decay. In front, pavement and straight lines and the infrastructure of modern transportation. Stepping from one to the other, from night to electric light, from ancient to contemporary. The temple is behind now, still there, still quiet, still holding its shape against time and weather and the patient dismantling efforts of the forest. Still keeping whatever secrets it has, not through active concealment, but through simple absence of explanation. Still functioning as a space where questions outnumber answers, and that seems perfectly appropriate. Walking down the road, back toward actual destination, means the forest closes in around the temple behind, the darkness complete, the stone invisible, the entire structure returning to the quiet obscurity that seems to be its natural state. Not lost, not forgotten, just quiet, just waiting for the next person to stumble across it and wonder what it was for and why it was left, and whether the leaving meant anything at all. The stars continue their rotation, the bats continue their hunting, the forest continues its slow work of integration and erosion, and the temple sits in the middle of it all, patient and still, a question mark in stone, designed, perhaps, to be exactly what it is. Not dramatic, not legendary. Just there, in the quiet spaces between what we know and what we wonder, between the past and the present, between intention and accident. Walking continues. The temple gets smaller behind, the forest gets quieter. The night deepens into itself, and somewhere in that deepening, in that quiet, in that slow fade from presence to memory, the temple does what it's been doing for centuries. It waits, it endures, it asks nothing, it offers less. And somehow, in that absence of demand and explanation, it becomes more interesting than most structures that shout their purposes from every surface. The road curves, the forest thickens, the temple disappears from view. What's left is the memory of it. The cool stone, the worn floors, the empty niches, the quiet courtyards. The sense of standing in a space that meant something to someone, even if what it meant remains unclear. The feeling of touching the same stones that other hands touched, for other reasons, in other times. That's what remains when the explanations fail. The physical connection, the shared experience of material and place, the knowledge that humans built this, used this, valued this, and then, for whatever reason, let it go, not destroyed, not forbidden, just released back into the landscape, free to become whatever time and weather would make of it. The car appears ahead. Keys are in pocket. The engine starts on the first try. The headlights cut through the darkness, creating a tunnel of visibility through the night. Pulling onto the road, heading back toward whatever counts as civilization in this particular location. In the rearview mirror, the forest is already invisible. The temple is already a memory. The questions are already settling into the comfortable uncertainty that characterizes most encounters with the ancient world. No answers exist, just impressions, sensations, the feeling of cold stone and cool air and darkness that smelled like wet leaves and time. That'll have to be enough. That's all there is. A structure in a forest, a purpose unknown. A silence that might mean abandonment, or might mean completion, or might mean nothing at all. A temple that was designed perhaps to be exactly what it became. Quiet, hidden, forgotten by most, remembered by a few, visited occasionally by people who wonder about it and then leave it behind. The road straightens. The forest recedes. The night continues its work of transformation and renewal. And somewhere behind, the temple sits in the darkness, patient and still, waiting for nothing, expecting nothing, being nothing more or less than what it is. A place where stones were stacked carefully. A space where something happened, once, repeatedly, for reasons that made sense at the time. That's the story. That's all the story there is. A temple in a forest. A quiet forgetting. A slow return to earth and vegetation, and the ordinary processes of time. No drama, no revelation, no hidden treasure or ancient curse or mystical alignment. Just stone and silence and the patient work of centuries, turning purpose into puzzle, intention into interpretation, certainty into the kind of gentle uncertainty that lets you rest. The headlights sweep across trees and road and darkness. The engine hums its mechanical rhythm. The night moves forward at its standard pace, 1 second per second, carrying away from the temple and toward whatever comes next. Behind, the forest closes in. The temple disappears. The silence deepens. And if standing there now, in that courtyard, under those stars, with back against that cold stone wall, nothing would be audible but wind in the canopy, and the distant call of an owl, and the small sounds of night creatures going about their business. Nothing would be visible but darkness, and the faint glow of stars through the opening in the canopy. Nothing would be felt but cool air and colder stone, and the pleasant weight of fatigue settling into muscles. Being in a place designed, perhaps, to hold space for something that no longer exists. A structure built to last, housing practices that didn't. A temple that forgot its own purpose, or had that purpose forgotten for it, or never advertised its purpose clearly enough for memory to hold. And in that forgetting, in that quiet erasure, in that slow return to anonymity, the temple became something else. Not a monument, not a ruin, not a warning or a lesson or a symbol. Just a place. Just stones arranged with care. Just space held open for whatever meaning you bring to it, or whatever meaning you leave behind. The road continues. The night continues. The forest continues its slow reclamation project, wrapping the temple in green, pulling it back toward earth, softening its edges, filling its spaces, making it part of the landscape rather than apart from it. And somewhere in that process the temple completes whatever work it was actually designed to do. Not to be found, not to be understood, not to be preserved or protected or restored to some imagined original state. Just to be. To sit quietly in a forest clearing that's no longer quite a clearing. To offer its questions to anyone patient enough to sit with them. To demonstrate through simple persistence that meaning isn't always necessary for things to matter. The headlights find the main road. The forest gives way to fields. The fields give way to scattered houses. The houses multiply into a town. The temple recedes into distance and darkness and memory. becoming one more quiet place in a world full of quiet places, waiting for the next person who needs to sit with uncertainty and cold stone and the comfortable silence of not knowing. That's all. That's everything. A temple, a forest, a question without an answer, a structure designed perhaps for exactly this, to be found, considered, appreciated and then left behind, free to continue its slow conversation with time and weather, and the patient processes that turn all human certainty into gentle speculation. The town lights appear ahead, street lamps casting their orange glow on pavement, traffic signals blinking through their cycles, the familiar geometry of modern human settlement, all angles and the electrical current, and the steady hum of infrastructure doing its invisible work. Parking happens in a designated space, marked with painted lines that tell you exactly where your vehicle belongs and for how long. The engine stops. Silence rushes in, but it's a different silence than the forest silence. This one has background noise, distant traffic, air conditioning units, the electronic buzz of transformers and power lines. The hotel room is on the 3rd floor, accessed by stairs that smell like industrial carpet cleaner and stale cigarette smoke from decades past, even though smoking has been banned for years. The keycard works on the second try. The room is exactly what you'd expect. 2 beds with identical floral bedspreads, a desk with a chair, a television mounted to the wall, a bathroom with fixtures that work but don't impress, everything functional, nothing memorable, but the bed is soft, and the sheets are clean, and the pillow is exactly the right height, and the temperature is controlled by a thermostat that responds immediately to input, and there's hot water on demand and electricity without interruption, and all the modern conveniences that the temple builders never imagined and probably wouldn't have wanted even if they could have. Lying back on the bed, still in clothes that smell like forest and limestone dust, means staring at the ceiling tiles and thinking about contrasts. The permanence of stone versus the disposability of drywall, the silence of abandonment versus the hum of climate control, the questions that temples ask versus the answers that hotels provide. The temple doesn't care that you left. It didn't care that you came. It's been sitting in that forest for centuries without human attention, and will continue sitting there for centuries more, whether anyone visits or not. The walls will keep standing until they don't. The stones will keep their arrangement until erosion and roots and time finish the work they've started. The niches will remain empty until the walls themselves collapse and fill them with rubble. There's something peaceful in that indifference. The temple makes no demands, expects no worship, requires no maintenance. It simply is, and in that simple being, it becomes more permanent than structures that need constant care to maintain their function. The hotel requires electricity and water and sewage and trash removal and staff and supplies, and all the complex infrastructure of modern hospitality. Cut any of those threads and the whole thing stops working within days. The temple just needs to be left alone. Eyes are closing now. The fatigue that's been building all day finally getting permission to do its work. The bed is soft. The room is quiet. The door is locked. All the conditions for safe sleep are met, triggering the ancient mechanisms that shut down conscious thought and allow the body to do its nightly repair work. But before sleep arrives completely, there's a moment of half-dreaming where the temple appears again. Not the real temple with its precise measurements and careful stone fitting and archaeological significance. The dream temple. The one that exists in the space between memory and imagination. Its walls are taller, its courtyards are darker, its silence is deeper. And in the centre of the main courtyard, the depression fills with water that reflects starlight, but has no visible source. In the dream, walking through the entrance corridor means the walls lean in closer. The darkness is thicker. The air tastes like limestone and time. The courtyard opens up but stays dark, the sky above showing stars that aren't quite right, constellations that almost match the real ones but have extra stars or missing stars or stars in slightly wrong positions. The platforms in the second courtyard are glowing faintly, each one pulsing with a different rhythm. The marble one in the centre glows brightest, a pale luminescence that doesn't illuminate anything around it, but makes the stone itself visible in the darkness. Standing on it means feeling vibration through your feet, a slow pulse, like a heartbeat, but deeper, slower, more patient. The small, overgrown structure is larger in the dream. The entrance is an actual doorway instead of a crawl space. Inside, instead of darkness, there's a faint blue light coming from somewhere below. Stairs descend into the earth, carved from living rock, worn smooth by feet that walk them long before the forest grew, and long after it will fall. But the dream doesn't want you to descend. The dream wants you to stay in the courtyard, to sit on the marble platform, to feel the pulse through the stone, to watch the other platforms pulse in their different rhythms, to notice how sometimes they sync up, all pulsing together for a few beats before drifting apart again into their individual patterns. The dream wants you to understand something about that, about how things can be separate but connected, about how patterns can emerge without coordination, about how meaning can exist without intention. But dreams don't explain themselves in words. They just show you things and trust you to figure out what they mean, if they mean anything at all. The stars in the dream sky are moving now, not in their normal slow arc across the heavens, faster, streaming past like the view from a spaceship travelling at impossible speeds. The constellations blur and smear and reform into new patterns. Orion becomes something else. The Pleiades scatter and regroup. Cassiopeia inverts herself. And through it all the temple sits unchanged. The stones stay where they were placed. The walls maintain their angles. The platforms keep pulsing. The courtyard holds its space. Everything in the universe is moving and changing and transforming, but the temple remains exactly what it is. That's the gift of stone. That's the wisdom of building something that doesn't require you. Make it solid enough and it becomes independent. Make it simple enough and it needs no explanation. Make it empty enough and it can hold whatever anyone brings to it. The dream is fading now. The blue light from the underground chamber is dimming. The platforms are slowing their pulse. The stars are settling back into their proper positions. The temple is becoming memory again, becoming impression, becoming the thing you'll try to describe tomorrow and find you can't quite capture in words. Because that's the other thing about temples. The real experience of them exists in the moment of encounter. You can photograph them. You can measure them. You can write detailed descriptions of every stone and every dimension and every architectural feature. But the feeling of standing in them, the sense of connection to the people who built them and used them and left them, the weight of time made tangible through weathered stone, that doesn't translate. You have to be there. You have to stand in the courtyard as the light fades. You have to touch the worn niches and feel the smoothness that came from centuries of hands. You have to sit on cold stone and watch the stars appear and listen to the forest settle into night. You have to let the temple work on you in whatever way it works, which might be profound or might be nothing at all. The dream is gone now. Sleep has arrived properly. The hotel room fades into irrelevance. The bed stops being a specific object and becomes just the surface you're lying on. The ceiling tiles dissolve, the walls recede. Everything that isn't necessary for sleep falls away. And somewhere in that falling away, in that release of conscious control, the temple appears one more time. Not the dream temple this time. Not the real temple either. Something in between. A temple that exists in the space where memory and imagination and experience blend together into something that's truer than any of them separately. This temple has no specific location. It could be the one you visited today. It could be any of the thousands of similar structures scattered across the Mediterranean and beyond. It could be a composite of all of them. An ideal temple that contains everything that makes these places special, while leaving out everything that makes them specific. Its walls are the perfect height. Its stones are the perfect colour. Its courtyards are the perfect size. Its silence is the perfect depth. And in the centre of the main courtyard, the depression holds exactly the right amount of water, reflecting exactly the right number of stars at exactly the right brightness. This is the temple that the builders saw when they planned the real one. This is what they were trying to create with their limestone and their labour and their careful measurements. They knew they'd fall short. Stone has limits. Human effort has limits. Time and weather would change whatever they built. But they built it anyway, getting as close as they could to this ideal, this perfect expression of whatever they were trying to express. And when they left, when the circumstances changed and the temple was no longer needed, they weren't abandoning their creation. They were releasing it, letting it become whatever time would make of it, trusting that even in ruins, even overgrown and forgotten, it would still carry some echo of what it was meant to be. That's the real design. Not the walls or the courtyards or the platforms, not the niches or the depressions or the drainage holes. The real design is in the letting go, the willingness to build something beautiful and functional and meaningful, and then walk away from it, to trust that what matters will persist, and what doesn't matter will fall away, and the difference between the two will become clear over time. The temple was designed to be forgotten, because forgetting is how we find out what's essential. Strip away the rituals and the beliefs and the specific cultural practices. Strip away the names of gods and the faces of priests and the sounds of prayers. Strip away everything that's contingent and temporary and tied to particular times and places. What's left is the structure itself, the stones, the space, the silence. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Sleep deepens. Dreams fade. The temple recedes to wherever temples go, when you're not thinking about them. The night continues its work. The body rests. The mind quiets. And somewhere in that quiet, in that rest, in that letting go of consciousness and control, you become exactly what the temple is. A space. A structure. A silence. Something that exists without needing to justify its existence. Something that holds room for questions without requiring answers. Something that was made with care and used with intention, and then released to time and weather and whatever comes next. The builders would understand this. They knew about letting go. They knew about building things that outlast their purposes. They knew about creating spaces that work whether anyone understands them or not. They built the temple and used it and left it and moved on to whatever came next in their lives. And the temple stayed, doing what temples do, being what temples are, holding space, keeping silence, asking nothing, offering everything, waiting patiently for the next person to stumble across it and wonder and sit a while and then leave, carrying the memory of cool stone and quiet courtyards, and the peculiar peace that comes from being in a place that makes no demands. That's the gift. That's the design. That's what lasts when everything else falls away. Just stone. Just space. Just silence. Just enough. If you found yourself drifting off somewhere between the marble platforms and the starlit courtyard, my sleepy scholars, then the temple did its work. Next time your algorithm suggests something actually restful, you know where to find us. Long before modern medicine offered pills in bottles, human beings understood something fundamental about the natural world. Certain plants possessed the quiet power to calm the restless mind, ease the tired body, and invite sleep when it refused to come. Across continents and centuries, people cultivated relationships with specific herbs and flowers, passing down methods of preparation through generations, creating rituals that transformed simple leaves and roots into gateways toward rest. The reed basket sits heavy in your hands as you wade through the shallows of the Nile Delta, somewhere in the Middle Kingdom period when Egypt's agricultural rhythms have already shaped civilization for over 1,000 years. The water reaches just above your ankles, warm during the day but holding a pleasant coolness now as the sun angles lower across the papyrus marshes. You're here for the blue lotus, those pale flowers that close their petals as darkness approaches. Though a few still float open on the surface, their blue-white petals reflecting the amber light. Nobody thinks of these flowers as exotic. They're as common as reeds, growing in every waterway, painted on every temple wall, carved into columns, and woven into the headdresses of both gods and nobles. But their commonness doesn't diminish their usefulness, particularly as the day's work concludes and the body begins to register its accumulated fatigue. You reach down and cut several stems just below the waterline, where they're thick and green. The flowers will be used fresh tonight. There's no need to dry them when they grow this abundantly. The basket fills slowly as you move through the marsh, selecting blooms that haven't fully closed yet, ones that still hold their shape. Your feet sink slightly into the soft mud below the water with each step, and somewhere nearby a heron watches your progress with the patience of a creature that has all evening to hunt. By the time you return to shore, the basket holds perhaps 24 flowers, their stems dripping water that catches the low sun. The village sits a short walk inland, where the ground rises just enough to stay dry during the annual floods. Smoke already drifts from cooking fires, and the air carries that particular mixture of baked earth, livestock, and the green smell of the river that defines every Egyptian settlement. Inside the house, the preparation requires no elaborate equipment. You strip the petals from their centres, letting them fall into a wide clay bowl. They bruise easily under your fingers, releasing a faint, sweet scent that's somehow both floral and earthy. The petals go into a jar of wine that's been warming gently near the fire. Not hot, just warm enough that when you pour it over the crushed flowers, they begin to release their essence immediately. The colour seeps into the liquid, turning it a cloudy blue-white. This isn't about getting drunk. The wine serves as a carrier, a way to extract what the flower offers. You let it sit while preparing the evening meal, while sweeping the floor, while the daylight fades from gold to grey outside the small window. By the time true darkness arrives and the oil lamps are lit, the infusion is ready. You strain out the wilted petals through a piece of linen, leaving behind a liquid that's taken on both the colour and the subtle sedative properties of the lotus. The drink tastes sweet, slightly perfumed, with the wine's grape flavour softened by something harder to name. Green, botanical, faintly bitter underneath the sweetness. You sip it slowly, sitting on a low stool while the day's heat radiates up from the mud brick walls. The effect isn't dramatic. There's no sudden drowsiness, no overwhelming urge to lie down immediately. Instead, the edges of wakefulness become softer. The thoughts that typically chase each other through your mind as you try to sleep, tomorrow's tasks, unresolved disputes, worries about the flood level or the grain stores, these don't disappear, but they lose their urgency. The sleeping mat has been rolled out on the floor, layered with linen that stays relatively cool despite the lingering warmth. You lie down while there's still a bit of oil left in the lamp, watching the small flame create moving shadows on the ceiling. The lotus makes the transition from wakefulness to sleep less of a border and more of a gradual slope. You're aware of sliding down it, noticing the way your limbs grow heavy, the way your breathing deepens without any conscious effort to control it. This ritual happens throughout the Nile Valley, in houses grand and modest. The lotus appears in artwork not because it's rare or sacred in the distant sense, but because it's intimately familiar, part of the daily negotiation with consciousness and rest. The priests use it before certain ceremonies, the wealthy serve it at evening gatherings, and ordinary farmers like yourself employ it simply because the river provides it freely, and the effect is reliable. By morning, the empty cup sits where you left it, a faint residue of blue staining its interior. The lotus flowers in the marsh will open again with the sun, and tomorrow evening the same process can repeat, as dependable as the river's flood cycle, as ordinary as bread. The hillside above the Greek settlement climbs at an angle that makes your thighs burn, even though you've walked these slopes your entire life. It's late summer, and the vegetation has that dried-out, dusty quality that comes after months without rain. But you're not here for the grasses that crunch under your feet, or the scattered olive trees that provide minimal shade. You're looking for valerian, which prefers the damper spots where springs seep from the hillside and keep the ground soft even in August. You find the first patch growing near a limestone outcrop where water trickles year-round, creating a zone of green in the otherwise brown landscape. The valerian stands waist-high, its clusters of tiny pink-white flowers mostly faded now, gone to seed. But it's the roots you need, thick and fibrous, growing deep into the moist soil. You've brought a digging tool, a simple iron blade attached to a wooden handle, and the work of extraction is neither quick nor easy. The first root comes free after considerable effort, bringing with it a clump of dark earth. The smell hits immediately. Musty, earthy, vaguely unpleasant, like damp socks stored too long in a closed chest. It's the kind of odour that makes you understand why some people refuse to use this plant no matter how well it works. You knock off the excess dirt and drop the root into your collection bag, then start on the next one. By the time you've gathered enough roots to last through the autumn months, the sun has moved perceptibly across the sky, and your fingernails are packed with soil. The walk back down the hillside is easier on the legs but harder on the knees, and you take it slowly, letting gravity do most of the work while you maintain balance on the rocky path. At home, the roots need washing before anything else. You scrub them in a basin of water drawn from the village well, removing the dirt to reveal pale, twisted shapes that look less like medicine and more like something you'd throw on a compost heap. They need to dry before they can be stored, so you spread them on a flat rock in the courtyard where the afternoon sun still reaches, turning them occasionally so all sides get air. The actual preparation for sleep won't happen until weeks from now, when these roots have dried completely and can be grated into a powder. But you already know how that will go because you've done it countless times. A small amount of the powder, about as much as you can pinch between thumb and forefinger, goes into warm water or wine. The drink that results tastes terrible, earthy and bitter with a lingering aftertaste that makes you wish you'd eaten something sweet afterward. But approximately an hour later, sometimes less, the effect arrives. It's different from wine drunk or the pleasant haze of lotus. Valerian doesn't make you feel good exactly. It makes you feel less alert, less interested in staying awake, less bothered by the discomforts that usually delay sleep. The rock that's somehow under the sleeping mat despite your best efforts to smooth the floor, the neighbour's dog that barks at shadows, the slight chill that creeps in after midnight. The Greeks approach this plant with the practicality they bring to most things. There's no ritual attached to it, no prayers or special timing. It's a tool, like a hammer or a plough, meant to accomplish a specific task. When sleep won't come naturally, when worry or pain keeps the mind churning through the dark hours, you use valerian. Simple as that. You've noticed that it works better on some people than others. Your brother claims it does nothing for him except make his stomach uneasy. Your cousin swears it's the only thing that lets her sleep during the full moon, when some personal sensitivity to light keeps her restless. You fall somewhere in the middle. It works consistently and reliably, but it's not pleasant enough to use casually. You save it for the nights when you know sleep will be difficult, when you've had an argument with someone, or when your mind is already picking at a problem before you've even lain down. The dried roots, once they're ready, get stored in a ceramic jar with a tight-fitting lid to contain that distinctive smell. The jar sits on a shelf with other practical items: olive oil, dried figs, a small amount of honey. Nothing ceremonial or precious, just another household substance with a specific use. On the nights when you do prepare the valerian drink, you do it without enthusiasm, but also without hesitation. You grate the root, add the powder to warm water, stir it until the bits are somewhat suspended in the liquid, and drink it quickly to minimize the taste. Then you go about the business of preparing for sleep, banking the fire, checking that the door is secured, arranging the bedding. By the time you lie down, the valerian is already beginning its work, creating a heaviness in your thoughts, a disinclination to move or think or do anything except sink into the darkness behind your closed eyes. Sleep arrives like a slowly closing door rather than a sudden drop. You're aware of it approaching, feel yourself moving toward it, and then you're simply there, on the other side, unconscious until the dawn birds start their noise. The monastery garden sits enclosed by stone walls that block the wind but let in the sun, creating a microclimate warm enough to grow herbs that would struggle in the harsher conditions beyond. You tend this garden as part of your duties, one among several brothers assigned to maintaining the plants that serve both kitchen and infirmary. It's spring, and the lavender you planted last autumn has survived the winter, putting out new growth from woody stems that looked dead a month ago. The monastic day follows a rhythm that divides darkness and light into prescribed portions: prayers at specific hours, work during daylight, sleep during a fixed period that nonetheless never feels quite long enough. The bell that signals the night office also interrupts sleep just as it's reaching its deepest point, pulling you from unconsciousness to stumble through hymns in a cold chapel before returning to bed for a few more hours. This pattern, repeated daily for years, creates a particular kind of weariness, one that accumulates gradually and never fully resolves. The lavender helps, not dramatically, not perfectly, but enough to matter. You harvest it in late summer when the flowers have opened fully but haven't yet begun to fade, cutting the stems in the morning after the dew has dried, but before the day's heat has driven off the volatile oils that carry the plant's properties. The cutting fills the garden with scent, that distinctive combination of floral sweetness and camphor sharpness that you'd recognise anywhere, even blindfolded. You bundle the cut stems with twine and hang them upside down in the drying room, a small stone chamber with good air circulation and no direct sunlight. They'll hang there for several weeks, slowly releasing moisture until the flowers feel crisp and the stems have gone brittle. The drying process concentrates the scent, making it stronger, almost overwhelming when you first enter the room after the door has been closed for days. Once dried, the lavender has multiple uses. The kitchen uses it sparingly in certain dishes. The infirmary keeps it for washing wounds, claiming it helps prevent infection, but the largest portion gets reserved for sleep preparation, divided among the brothers according to need. You keep a supply in your cell, a sparse room with a sleeping platform, a small table, and a niche in the wall for prayer. Before the night office, when you know you'll need to fall back asleep quickly after being woken, you prepare a simple lavender infusion. The process requires only hot water and a handful of dried flowers, steeped until the water takes on a pale purple tint and the scent fills the small space. The drink tastes floral, slightly bitter, more pleasant than valerian, but less sweet than lotus-infused wine. You sip it while reading by candlelight, usually something devotional that won't stimulate the mind too much. The lavender's effect is subtle, more of a quieting than a sedation. Your thoughts don't vanish, but they move more slowly with less urgency. The physical restlessness that usually makes the hour before sleep uncomfortable, the need to shift position constantly, to scratch at nothing in particular, to feel vaguely dissatisfied with every arrangement of pillow and blanket, this eases away. When the bell rings for the night office, you rise from a light sleep, the kind that releases you easily rather than dragging you back down. You file into the chapel with the other brothers, stand through the prayers and responses, and then return to your cell while the lavender's influence still lingers. This second sleep comes faster than the first, your body grateful to return to unconsciousness, the lavender smoothing the transition. Some brothers prefer to keep dried lavender in a cloth bag under their pillows, claiming the scent alone provides benefit. You've tried this and found it less effective than drinking the infusion, but you appreciate the logic. The scent is undeniably calming, associated so strongly with rest that merely smelling it creates a kind of psychological preparation for sleep. The monastery garden also grows chamomile, another plant valued for its calming properties. The chamomile flowers in early summer, producing small white blooms with yellow centres that smell of apples when crushed. You harvest these too, drying them alongside the lavender, sometimes mixing the two for an infusion that combines chamomile's gentle apple sweetness with lavender's more complex floral notes. On the worst nights, when anxiety about some failing or concern about the community keeps your mind too active for sleep, you prepare a stronger infusion using both herbs, steeping them longer than usual, making the drink more potent. These nights are relatively rare. The monastic schedule generally exhausts you thoroughly enough that sleep comes regardless of your mental state. But they do occur, and having the herbs available provides both practical relief and psychological comfort. The garden itself becomes part of the sleep preparation simply through the work of maintaining it. The repetitive tasks of weeding, watering and pruning occupy the hands while leaving the mind free to settle. The scents rise from the plants whenever you brush against them, and over time the association between those scents and rest becomes deeply established. You can walk through the garden in the afternoon and feel a hint of sleepiness, triggered purely by the smell of lavender warming in the sun. The monastery keeps records of herb cultivation and usage, written in the same careful hand used for copying scripture. These records note which plants grow well in which locations, which combinations seem most effective, which brothers prefer which preparations. It's a practical accumulation of knowledge, driven by the simple goal of making the community's mandatory sleep schedule slightly more functional despite its constant interruptions. You write occasional entries in these records yourself, noting that the lavender planted on the south side of the garden produces more fragrant flowers than the north side planting, or that chamomile steeped for 10 minutes seems more effective than 5 minutes steeping, or that mixing the two herbs creates an effect different from using either alone. These observations aren't scientific in the modern sense, but they're methodical, based on repeated experience, and they slowly build into a body of practical knowledge. Years of using these herbs create their own kind of dependence, not in the sense of addiction, but in the sense of habit. You've grown accustomed to the ritual of preparation, the familiar tastes and scents, the reliable, if mild, effects. On the rare occasions when the garden supply runs low before the next harvest, when you must try to sleep without the usual infusion, you notice the absence more than you'd expect. Sleep still comes eventually, but it feels harder one, less smooth in its arrival. The Roman bathhouse represents a different approach to rest, one that combines heat, water, and aromatic plants into a multi-stage process that occupies the late afternoon hours. You arrive while the sun still lights the entrance, but is low enough that the day's business is mostly concluded, the time when respectable citizens begin turning their attention toward evening pleasures and the inevitable approach of sleep. The complex sprawls across an entire city block, its rooms arranged in a sequence designed to gradually prepare the body for rest. You start in the changing room, removing your street clothes and donning the simple linen wrap that covers what modesty requires, while leaving most of your skin exposed to air and water. The floor beneath your feet is heated, warm enough to feel pleasant but not uncomfortable, powered by the hypocaust system that sends hot air through channels under the tiles. The first room beyond the entrance is the tepidarium, moderately warm, where your body begins adjusting to heat without the shock of sudden temperature change. The air here carries the scent of lavender and rose, oils that have been mixed with the water in the shallow pools and sprinkled on the heated floors. A few other bathers recline on stone benches along the walls, their faces slack with the beginning of relaxation. Nobody speaks much. The atmosphere discourages conversation, encouraging instead a kind of peaceful solitude even in the presence of others. You sit for a while, letting the warmth seep into muscles that have been tensed all day, feeling your shoulders drop and your breathing deepen. The scent of lavender grows more noticeable as your pores open, and you begin to understand how the Romans have refined this process beyond mere washing. This is theatre of relaxation, each stage carefully calibrated to move the body and mind toward a state of profound rest. When you're warm enough that a faint sweat has started on your forehead, you move to the caldarium, the hot room, where steam rises from pools of almost scalding water and the air is thick enough to make breathing require conscious effort. The heat here is intense, purposeful, designed to drive weariness from muscles and fog from mind. You lower yourself into one of the hot pools gradually, letting your body adjust to temperature that would be painful if entered too quickly. The water contains more than heat. Chamomile flowers float on the surface, bruised and broken, releasing their apple-sweet scent into the steam. Your skin turns pink, then red, as blood rushes to the surface. Sweat runs freely now, and you can feel your heart working harder to cool a body that's being deliberately overheated. The experience borders on uncomfortable, yet there's a strange pleasure in it, in pushing toward the edge of what you can tolerate and then staying there, letting the heat do its work. Other bathers come and go, immersing themselves briefly before retreating to cooler rooms. You stay longer, having learned that the real benefit comes from sustained exposure, from letting the heat penetrate deeply, rather than just warming the surface. Your thoughts become scattered, hard to hold on to, as if the heat is burning away your ability to maintain coherent worry. Eventually you pull yourself from the hot pool and move to the frigidarium, the cold room, where water so cold it makes you gasp waits in a deep plunge pool. The shock of this transition, from extreme heat to extreme cold, creates a sensation that's both jarring and strangely exhilarating. Your skin tightens, your breathing catches, and for a moment you feel intensely awake, more alert than you've been all day. But this alertness doesn't last. As you climb out of the cold pool and dry yourself with rough linen towels, a different kind of exhaustion settles over you, deeper and more thorough than simple tiredness. Your body has been put through a process, heated, cooled, heated again, that has recalibrated its basic functions. Your muscles feel loose and heavy. Your mind, cleared of thoughts by the heat, seems disinclined to generate new ones. The final stage involves massage with oils, and this is where the Romans demonstrate their most sophisticated understanding of plant-based relaxation. The masseur uses oil infused with lavender, chamomile and poppy, not opium, which is controlled and expensive, but the milder properties extracted from poppy petals. The oil is warm, worked into your back and shoulders with firm pressure that finds knots you didn't know existed and gradually breaks them down. The combination of physical manipulation and aromatic absorption creates an effect that's frankly soporific. You lie face down on a massage table while the masseur works methodically from neck to feet, and by the time they finish, you have to make conscious effort not to simply fall asleep right there on the table. The walk home happens in a kind of dream state, your body wrapped in clean clothes, your hair still damp, your skin carrying the lingering scent of lavender and chamomile. The evening air feels cool after the heat of the baths, pleasant against flushed skin. Other bathers move through the streets with the same slow, satisfied pace, a small population of people who have deliberately exhausted themselves in preparation for night. At home, you eat a light meal, the bathhouse routine works better on a not quite empty stomach, and then lie down while the sun's last light still shows outside. Sleep comes like a tide, unstoppable and complete, pulling you under in what feels like seconds. The plant oils on your skin continue releasing their scents throughout the night, though you're too unconscious to notice. Your breathing stays deep and regular, your muscles remain slack, and you sleep through until dawn without waking once. The Romans have systematized rest in a way that acknowledges its complexity. They understand that sleep isn't something that simply happens when you're tired, that it can be prepared for, staged, enhanced through deliberate manipulation of temperature, scent, and physical sensation. The bathhouse represents a community's collective agreement that rest deserves this much attention, this much infrastructure. Not everyone can afford the time or entrance fee for daily bathhouse visits, but those who can develop a dependency on the routine that goes beyond the physical effects of heat and aromatic oils. The ritual itself becomes sleep-inducing, the familiar progression through rooms and temperatures, the known scents and sensations. Your body begins anticipating rest as soon as you enter the changing room, and by the time you reach the massage table, you're already halfway asleep. The Persian garden sits surrounded by high walls that turn it into a world separate from the dusty streets beyond. Water channels divided into 4 quarters, following the ancient pattern that represents paradise. Each channel lined with tiles that stay cool even when the afternoon sun beats down on the paths. You walk along one of these channels as the day declines toward evening, appreciating the sound of running water, the shade provided by fruit trees, the careful arrangement of flowering plants that creates a sequence of scents changing with each season. Tonight the roses are blooming, dark red flowers that release their strongest perfume as temperature cools. But you're here for something more specific than general ambience. At the far end of the garden, where the walls create a corner that gets afternoon shade, a patch of poppies grows under careful supervision. These aren't the opium poppies, the ones that produce the sticky resin valued for both medicine and pleasure, tightly controlled and taxed. These are simpler varieties, grown for their petals rather than their sap, valued for the mild sedative properties that come from steeping those petals in water or wine. The flowers are just beginning to open, their tissue-thin petals unfurling in shades of red, pink and white. You've been told to harvest only the red ones, to take the petals at the moment when the flower is fully open but not yet beginning to fade. This requires checking the plants multiple times as evening approaches, watching for that perfect moment. When you find flowers at the right stage, you pluck the petals carefully, letting them fall into a basket lined with cloth to prevent bruising. The work is meditative in its own right, requiring close attention but not much thought. The garden sounds, water, birds settling for night, wind in the trees, create a background that encourages a quiet mind. The scent of roses mixes with the sharper smell of the herbs growing in another section, and as the light continues to fade, the garden's temperature drops to something almost comfortable after the day's heat. By the time you've collected enough petals, the sun has set and the sky is showing its first stars. You carry the basket inside to a preparation room where other servants are engaged in similar tasks, drying herbs, mixing oils, preparing the substances that will help the household's occupants move smoothly from waking to sleep. The red poppy petals require gentle handling. You spread them on a clean cloth, picking out any that are damaged or have insects clinging to them. The ones that pass inspection go into a jar of sweet wine, where they'll steep overnight, releasing their colour and properties into the liquid. By tomorrow evening, the wine will have turned a deep pink and taken on a subtle bitterness beneath its sweetness. You've tasted this preparation before, in small amounts, enough to understand what it does. The effect is gentler than valerian, less distinctive than lavender, more subtle than lotus. It softens the edges of awareness without creating obvious drowsiness, makes the prospect of sleep more appealing without forcing it. The Persian approach to rest favours this kind of subtlety, preferring gentle persuasion to blunt sedation. The household's evening routine incorporates multiple plant-based elements, each contributing to a general atmosphere of winding down. Incense burns in the main rooms, releasing the scent of sandalwood and frankincense. Rosewater gets sprinkled on linens and cushions. The wine served with dinner includes herbs known for their calming properties, not enough to be medicinal, just enough to contribute to the overall effect. This layering of scents and tastes, this careful construction of an environment conducive to rest, represents a different philosophy than using a single strong preparation. The Persians seem to believe that sleep comes best when approached from multiple directions simultaneously, when every sense receives gentle encouragement toward relaxation. The sleeping quarters open onto the garden, allowing night air to flow through. You can hear the water channels from your sleeping mat, their constant murmur providing sound that masks the occasional noise from the street beyond the walls. The linens smell of roses, the air carries hints of jasmine from flowers that bloom only at night, and your last drink of the evening, the poppy-infused wine, sits warm in your stomach, beginning its quiet work. Sleep arrives without drama, a gradual dimming of consciousness that happens while you're still noticing the scents and sounds around you. One moment you're aware of the water's sound and the jasmine's perfume, the next you're aware of nothing at all, dropped into unconsciousness so smoothly that there's no memory of the transition. The Persian emphasis on beauty extends even to the tools of rest. The jars that hold dried herbs are glazed in brilliant colours. The cups used for evening drinks are carved from jade or shaped from fine pottery. The incense burners are worked brass, decorated with patterns that catch lamplight. These aesthetic choices serve a purpose beyond mere decoration. They make the preparation for sleep feel ceremonial, important, worthy of attention and care. You wake once during the night when the moon has risen high enough to send light through the open wall of your sleeping chamber. The garden is silver and black, the water channels glinting where moonlight catches them, the flowers reduced to pale shapes. The jasmine's scent seems even stronger now, and you can hear a nightingale somewhere in the trees singing its complicated song to the darkness. You don't feel fully awake. More like you're observing from somewhere between sleep and waking, aware enough to register sensations but not alert enough to think about them. The poppy wine keeps you in this half state, neither pulling you back to full consciousness nor dropping you immediately into deep sleep. You drift there for a while, listening to the bird, breathing the flower-scented air, and then slide back under without choosing to, claimed again by unconsciousness. By morning the wine jar will be empty, the petals strained out and discarded, the evidence of last night's preparation cleared away. But tonight those petals are still doing their work, dissolved into liquid, absorbed into blood, contributing their small influence toward rest. The Ayurvedic physician's room smells of ground spices and dried roots, scents so complex and layered that identifying individual components becomes impossible. You sit on a low cushion while he asks questions about your sleep. How quickly it comes, how often you wake, how you feel upon rising, whether you dream, whether you wake refreshed or still tired. The questions are detailed, probing, searching for patterns that will help him determine which plant preparation will serve you best. He's already examined your pulse, your tongue, your eyes, making observations about your constitution that use terms you don't entirely understand. Something about an excess of vata, about air and movement needing to be calmed, about your mind being too active for your body's natural rhythms. The diagnosis leads to prescription, ashwagandha, an herb he describes as particularly useful for those whose sleep is disrupted by worry or mental restlessness. The ashwagandha root sits on a shelf behind him, dried and shriveled, looking unpromising. He takes down the container and begins grinding a portion of the root using a stone mortar and pestle, working with practiced efficiency until he has a fine powder. This powder goes into a cup along with warm milk and honey, the three ingredients stirred until the powder is suspended in the liquid. The mixture tastes earthy and slightly bitter, despite the honey, with an aftertaste that's hard to describe. Not unpleasant exactly, but distinctive enough that you understand you'll recognize this flavor if you taste it again. He instructs you to drink this preparation every evening, approximately 2 hours before you wish to sleep, and to continue for at least several weeks before judging its effectiveness. The theory, as he explains it, involves balancing energies and calming excess movement in both mind and body. The ashwagandha works slowly, building its effect over time rather than producing immediate drowsiness. You're meant to notice, after consistent use, that falling asleep requires less effort, that your mind quiets more readily when you lie down, that sleep itself is deeper and less interrupted by the thoughts that currently pull you back to partial wakefulness several times each night. You take home a supply of the ground root, enough for a month of daily use, along with instructions for preparation and timing. That evening you make the mixture yourself, copying what you watched him do, though your stirring is less thorough and some powder clings to the side of the cup. The taste is familiar from the sample you drank in his office. Earthy, warm from the milk, sweetened but not sweet. Nothing dramatic happens. You go about your evening routine, and when you lie down, sleep comes in its usual way, after the usual period of waiting and mind-wandering. You wonder if you've wasted money on something that doesn't work, if the physician's confidence was just salesmanship. But you continue the routine because you've paid for a month's supply, and because the physician was clear that the effect builds gradually. Each evening you prepare the ashwagandha milk, drink it while it's still warm, and continue with your normal activities for a couple of hours before attempting sleep. After a week, you notice something subtle. The transition from waking to sleep feels slightly smoother, less like struggling against your own mind. The thoughts that typically chase each other in circles as you lie in darkness, worries about money, replays of conversations that went badly, rehearsals of conversations that haven't happened yet. These still occur, but they seem to have less energy, less ability to hold your attention. After 2 weeks, the effect is clearer. You're falling asleep more quickly, and when you wake during the night, which still happens occasionally, you drift back under instead of lying awake for long periods. Your dreams become more vivid, though you're not sure if this is a property of the ashwagandha or simply because you're sleeping deeply enough to remember them better. The physician warned that ashwagandha works best as part of a broader approach to rest, and he gave you other instructions beyond just taking the nightly drink. You're meant to establish a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed and rising at the same hours each day. You're supposed to avoid stimulating activities in the evening. No vigorous exercise, no arguments, no intense thinking. Your last meal should be several hours before sleep, and it should be light rather than heavy. These behavioural changes probably contribute to the improving sleep as much as the herb itself, but they work together, each element supporting the others. The ashwagandha makes the behavioural changes more effective, while the consistent routine makes the herb's subtle effects more noticeable. The taste becomes familiar enough that you begin to anticipate it, to associate it with the evening's winding down. The ritual of preparation, warming the milk, stirring in the powder and honey, drinking it while it's still warm enough to feel comforting, this becomes as important as the substance itself. You're marking a boundary between day and night, between active hours and rest hours, using a plant that grows half a world away in climates nothing like yours. After the first month, you return to the physician for more supply and to report on effects. He seems unsurprised by your description, nodding as if this matches what he expected. He asks whether you want to continue or try something different, and you realise the question is easy. Whatever combination of factors has improved your sleep, you're not interested in changing it. You buy another month's supply, then another. The dependence that develops isn't addiction in any meaningful sense. You can sleep without the ashwagandha, and you've proven this on occasions when you've travelled or simply run out of supply. But sleep comes harder without it, less reliably, with more wakefulness during the night. The herb has become part of your body's expectation of evening, and removing it creates a gap that your physiology notices. Years of use create their own feedback loop. The improved sleep makes you generally calmer during the day, less prone to the anxiety that originally disrupted your rest. This daytime calmness should, theoretically, make the nighttime herb less necessary. But by now the ritual has become fixed, and you continue the nightly preparation more from habit than necessity, unable to imagine evenings without that familiar earthy taste, that feeling of having done something intentional to support rest. The convent's herbarium occupies a building separate from the main dormitory, its own stone structure with a tiled roof and windows facing south to maximise light. Inside, the air stays cool year-round, perfect for preserving dried plants that hang from ceiling beams in bundles or rest in labelled jars along the walls. You work here several hours each day, processing harvests from the garden, preparing medicines and helpful substances for the community. Today you're working with lemon balm, a plant that grows so enthusiastically in the garden that it requires constant harvesting to keep it from taking over the beds, meant for other herbs. The fresh stems are bright green, the leaves heavily textured and releasing their distinctive scent, lemony but also minty, slightly sharp whenever you brush against them. You strip leaves from stems, discarding any that show signs of disease or insect damage, keeping only the perfect ones for drying. The lemon balm will be used primarily in evening teas, both for the community here and for lay people who come seeking help with sleeplessness. It's gentler than valerian, more reliably effective than chamomile alone, and pleasant tasting enough that people actually enjoy drinking it rather than forcing it down as medicine. You work slowly, methodically, finding the rhythm that makes repetitive tasks meditative. Your hands move automatically, strip, inspect, keep or discard, while your mind stays mostly quiet, occasionally forming prayers but more often just resting in the simple, physical reality of the work. The scent of lemon balm fills the herbarium, fresh and clean, cutting through the mustier smells of dried roots and older herbs. Another sister enters carrying a basket of freshly harvested calendula flowers, their orange petals bright even in the dim interior light. She works at a different table, beginning her own processing task, and for a while you work in companionable silence, the kind of shared quiet that feels comfortable rather than awkward. The sleep preparation you'll make tonight for yourself uses lemon balm as its base but includes other herbs as well. A small amount of passion flower for its calming properties, a pinch of dried hops that contributes bitterness but also sedative effect, and a bit of lavender because the combination of lemon balm and lavender creates a taste more pleasant than either alone. The proportions matter. Too much hops makes the tea undrinkably bitter. Too little passion flower and you might as well just drink lemon balm by itself. You've learned these ratios through years of experimentation, adjusting and readjusting until finding a combination that tastes acceptable and produces reliable effects. The convent day includes evening prayers that happen after full darkness, requiring you to be awake at an hour when your body would prefer to be sleeping. The herbal tea helps with this strange schedule, allowing you to stay alert through the prayers without feeling wired or agitated, then facilitating quick sleep once you're finally allowed to retire. You prepare the tea in your cell, using water heated over a small lamp, steeping the mixed herbs until the liquid turns pale yellow-green, and the combined scents fill the narrow space. The taste is complex: lemon balm's brightness, lavender's floral note, the bitter edge of hops, something harder to name that must come from the passion flower. You've grown to like it, or at least to appreciate it, the way you might appreciate any taste that's become deeply associated with rest. The prayers happen, as they always do, pulling you from the drowsy state the tea induces back to full wakefulness. You stand and kneel and sit through the familiar liturgy, your voice joining others in hymns you've sung so many times you could perform them while fully asleep. The chapel is cold, lit by candles that create more shadow than light, and you're grateful when the final prayers conclude and you're released back to your cell. Sleep comes quickly once you're horizontal, the herbs still working their way through your system, your body dropping into unconsciousness, with the relief of a burden set down. You don't dream much, or at least you don't remember dreams, and you wake when the morning bell rings feeling more rested than the hours of actual sleep should allow. The herbarium keeps records, just like the monastery you once heard about, documenting which plants grow well in which conditions, which combinations seem most effective for which purposes, which sisters prefer, which preparations. These records aren't scientific, but they're systematic, building a body of knowledge that will survive beyond any individual's lifetime. You've made entries yourself, noting that lemon balm planted in partial shade produces more aromatic leaves than full sun plantings, that passion flower needs support structures to climb, that hops harvested slightly before full maturity are less bitter than fully mature cones. These observations join hundreds of others, creating a manuscript that's part gardening manual, part pharmacy reference, part community history. The knowledge feels precious in a way that's hard to articulate. You're preserving something that could easily be lost, the understanding of which plants help with rest, how to prepare them, how to combine them for different effects. This knowledge predates the convent, passed down through generations of women who learned it from their mothers and grandmothers, but it's also constantly evolving as new observations add to old wisdom. The night market operates by lamplight, creating a temporary world that exists only after sunset. You walk between stalls selling food, cloth, tools and, in one section that draws you like gravity, herbs and spices. The vendor you're seeking specializes in plants from distant regions, things that don't grow locally but arrive via trade routes that stretch across continents. Tonight you're here for something specific, dried chamomile from Egypt, which is said to be superior to the local variety. The flowers are smaller than the chamomile that grows in your own garden, more intensely scented with a sweeter apple fragrance. The vendor lets you smell a sample, crushing a few flowers between his fingers to release their full aroma. The scent is indeed remarkable, more concentrated than anything you've grown yourself. You buy a small quantity, it's expensive, imported goods always are, and also purchase some dried orange peel, which you've heard pairs well with chamomile for evening drinks. At home, you experiment with proportions, trying different ratios of chamomile to orange peel, steeping for various lengths of time, adjusting water temperature. The best combination turns out to be mostly chamomile with just a small amount of orange peel, steeped in water that's hot but not quite boiling for approximately 7 minutes. The resulting tea tastes like apples and oranges had a child that was somehow more subtle than either parent. The chamomile's natural sweetness gets enhanced by the orange peel's faint bitterness, creating a flavour that's interesting enough to drink for pleasure, but calming enough to serve its purpose as sleep preparation. You drink this tea in the hour before bed, sitting near a window where you can watch the last activity in the street below gradually diminish as night deepens. The tea's warmth spreads through your chest and stomach, and the familiar relaxation begins, shoulders dropping, breathing deepening, thoughts slowing their frantic pace. The Egyptian chamomile does seem more effective than your local variety, though you can't be certain whether this is objectively true or just the psychological effect of believing it should work better, because it's exotic and expensive. Either way, the result is the same. Sleep comes more easily on nights when you drink this particular blend than on nights when you don't. You begin growing protective of your supply, rationing it carefully to make it last, using it only when you particularly need help sleeping rather than every single night. This transforms the tea from routine to treat, something special reserved for difficult nights when rest feels most elusive. The market vendor becomes familiar with your regular purchases, sometimes setting aside particularly good chamomile when his supplier brings a fresh shipment. You develop a relationship built around these small transactions. Your money for his plants, his knowledge of sources and quality for your appreciation and loyalty. He tells you stories about the origins of what he sells, describing Egyptian fields where chamomile grows in such profusion that the air smells of apples for miles, or mountain valleys where lavender blooms in sheets of purple that attract bees from every direction. You suspect some of these stories are exaggerated or entirely invented, but they add value beyond the physical product, connecting you to distant places and the people who grow these plants. The rituals of acquisition and preparation become as important as the effects of consumption. Walking to the night market, evaluating quality, negotiating price, carrying home your purchase, experimenting with preparation, finding the optimal combination. All of these steps contribute to the overall experience of using plants for rest. The darkness in your room has become complete now, the lamp burned down to nothing, the window showing only the faint difference between inside darkness and outside darkness. You've been lying here for some time, impossible to say how long without light to mark time's passage, letting the various influences of herbs and routine and deliberate quieting do their work. Your breathing has found a rhythm that requires no thought, deep and slow, each exhale lasting slightly longer than the inhale. The bed beneath you has stopped feeling like something separate from your body and started feeling like an extension of it, or perhaps you've extended into it, boundaries blurring in the way they do when consciousness begins its slide towards sleep. The scents that filled the room earlier, whatever plant you use tonight, though the specific identity is becoming hard to recall, have faded to the point where you notice them only occasionally when breathing catches them at a particular angle. They're background now, part of the atmosphere rather than a distinct sensation. Your mind has stopped producing coherent thoughts and switched to something more like images, disconnected fragments that drift past without requiring attention or response. A garden you worked in once, a river you crossed, hands preparing something in a bowl, though whose hands and what substance you can't quite determine. This state between waking and sleeping feels comfortable rather than frustrating, a place you could remain indefinitely without complaint. The usual urgency to actually achieve sleep, to make the transition happen has dissolved. If sleep comes, fine. If it doesn't, also fine. The distinction between the two states matters less than it did when evening first arrived. The plants have done what they do, subtle or strong, quick or slow, each in its own way moving the body and mind towards stillness. The chamomile and lavender and valerian and lotus and ashwagandha and lemon balm, the poppy petals and rose scents and herb-infused oils, all the careful preparations and thoughtful rituals, the accumulated wisdom of generations who noticed what grew around them and learned to use it, these have created conditions favourable to rest. But the actual transition, the moment when awareness finally releases and unconsciousness claims you completely, this can't be forced or scheduled or guaranteed, regardless of how many herbs you use or how perfectly you follow ancient prescriptions. It happens when it happens, or it doesn't happen at all, and the plants can only increase the likelihood, make the waiting more comfortable, smooth the path but not control the destination. You're aware of this even in your current half state, aware that you're waiting for something that will arrive in its own time, or possibly not arrive at all, and that this uncertainty is fine, acceptable, not worth worrying about. The darkness holds you without pressure, the silence wraps around you without demanding anything, and somewhere in this gentle suspension between states, the final letting go occurs. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're still here, still aware, still noticing the way breath moves in and out, the way the mattress presses up against your back, the way sounds from outside, distant, muffled, unidentifiable, reach you through whatever walls separate inside from outside. Maybe sleep is still approaching, or maybe it's already happened and what remains is some fragment of consciousness too small to notice its own sleeping. The plants can't answer this question. They've done their part, contributed what chemistry and scent and ritual can contribute, and now the rest is up to processes beyond their influence, beyond anyone's influence. The body will do what it does, the mind will follow or not follow, and eventually morning will arrive whether you've slept through the intervening hours or simply rested in darkness while time passed. The thought of morning already feels distant, irrelevant, something that might as well be years away for all the immediacy it carries. Right now there's only this, darkness, breath, the slowly diminishing awareness of being aware, the gentle dissolving of boundaries between you and the bed and the room and the night itself. Somewhere in all this dissolving, in this gradual releasing of the need to maintain consciousness, sleep finds its opening. Not with drama or announcement, not with a clear moment when you could say, now I'm falling asleep, but rather with a fading so gradual that there's no single point where wake becomes sleep, only a continuum that grows dimmer and dimmer until finally, without your noticing the transition, you're simply gone. You're about to journey through humanity's most puzzling achievements, those moments when our ancestors accomplished something that still makes modern scientists scratch their heads and reach for their calculators. This isn't a story of aliens or mysticism, but rather of clever people solving problems with whatever they had at hand, leaving behind creations that whisper questions across the centuries. Settle in as we explore the quiet ingenuity that predated laboratories, the patient craftsmanship that defies easy explanation, and the knowledge that travelled through skilled hands rather than published papers. Picture yourself standing in the Egyptian desert around 2500 BCE, watching workers position a limestone block that weighs as much as a school bus. The block slides into place with barely a finger's width of gap between it and its neighbour. You can't see any mortar, just stone touching stone with the kind of precision that would make a modern mason weep with envy. The Great Pyramid of Giza rises before you, its surface smooth as polished glass under the desert sun. Over 2 million blocks went into its construction, each one cut and placed with an accuracy that engineers today measure in fractions of millimetres. The whole structure sits level to within just 2 centimetres across its 13-acre base. That's roughly the thickness of your thumb spread across an area larger than 7 football fields. Nobody's quite sure how they managed it. You walk closer, running your hand along the base stones. Each block fits against its neighbours so snugly that you couldn't slip a playing card between them. The builders achieved this without modern surveying equipment, without laser levels, and without spirit levels filled with alcohol. They had copper tools, stone pounders, and an understanding of geometry that makes you wonder what else they knew that didn't survive in their written records. The internal chambers present their own mysteries. The Grand Gallery rises at a precise 26-degree angle, its corbelled ceiling creating a space that feels almost like a cathedral carved from stone. The blocks forming this passage weigh several tons each, yet they're positioned with the kind of accuracy you'd expect from someone assembling a watch, not a mountain. Modern researchers have proposed dozens of theories about construction methods. Ramps feature prominently: straight ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, ramps made of sand, and ramps made of brick. Each theory solves some problems while creating others. A straight ramp long enough and gentle enough to drag blocks to the pyramid's peak would require more material than the pyramid itself. Internal ramps leave questions about how workers maneuvered in confined spaces. External spiral ramps might explain access but complicate the question of achieving such precise angles and alignments. Some engineers suggest the Egyptians used a form of concrete, pouring a limestone mixture into moulds rather than dragging cut blocks. The theory would explain the precision. Pouring is easier than positioning, but analysis of the stones shows natural limestone, complete with fossils and geological features that concrete wouldn't contain. The blocks were definitely quarried, definitely transported, and definitely lifted into place. Then there's the question of time. According to ancient historians, the Great Pyramid took about 20 years to complete. That sounds like plenty of time until you do the arithmetic. 2,300,000 blocks divided by 20 years means roughly 115,000 blocks per year. Divide that by the number of days workers could actually work, accounting for floods, festivals, and the basic fact that even the most dedicated stonemason needs to sleep occasionally. And you're looking at placing a block every 2 to 3 minutes, around the clock, for 2 decades. You watch the sun set behind the pyramid, painting its limestone face in shades of amber and rose. The ancient builders aligned the structure almost perfectly with true north. Not magnetic north, which wanders, but true north, determined by the stars. The error measures less than 1/15 of a degree. They achieved this accuracy 46 centuries before GPS satellites started orbiting overhead. The 4 sides of the pyramid's base each measure about 230 meters long, and they match each other to within 20 centimeters. That's less error than you'd probably make measuring your living room with a tape measure. The ancient surveyors accomplished this across distances longer than 2 football fields, using tools that archaeologists have found in tomb paintings: wooden set squares, plumb bobs, and lengths of rope. Inside the king's chamber, you'd find blocks of red granite that travelled from quarries 500 miles up the Nile. Each granite block weighs between 25 and 80 tons, as much as a locomotive. How did workers move these monsters onto boats, off boats, and then up into the heart of the pyramid? The question gets more interesting when you learn that the chamber's granite ceiling beams show no signs of sagging, after 46 centuries supporting thousands of tons of stone overhead. Engineers have tried to calculate the forces and stresses involved. The numbers work, barely, if you assume the builders understood engineering principles that wouldn't be formally described for thousands of years. They needed to grasp load distribution, material strength, and structural mechanics. They couldn't test these theories with computer models or calculate them with advanced mathematics. They figured it out through observation, experience, and probably more than a few spectacular failures that didn't survive in the historical record. The subsidiary pyramids and temples surrounding the main structure add more questions. The mortuary temple features massive pillars cut from single pieces of granite. The precision required to shape these pillars without shattering them exceeds what you'd expect from copper tools and sand abrasives. Yet there they stand, their surfaces still showing the marks of ancient tools. Modern attempts to replicate pyramid construction using ancient methods have produced mixed results. Teams have successfully moved large blocks using wooden sledges, rope, and water to lubricate sand. They've cut limestone with copper saws and Mohenjo-daro used by ancient quarrymen. but nobody's yet demonstrated the ability to maintain pyramid-level precision while working at pyramid-level speed. The experimental blocks tend to be rougher, the gaps wider, and the alignment less exact. This doesn't mean the ancient Egyptians had lost technology or secret knowledge. It suggests something perhaps more remarkable. They developed a level of organised craftsmanship that modern civilization, for all its technological advantages, finds difficult to coordinate. Thousands of workers, all trained to extremely high standards, all working in concert, all maintaining precision across years of continuous construction. You think about the planning involved. Someone had to organise quarrying operations, boat transport, construction sequencing, worker housing, food supply, tool manufacture and maintenance. Someone had to train the workers, inspect their output and solve problems as they arose. The logistics of building a pyramid might be as impressive as the engineering. The night deepens and stars appear above the desert. The ancient builders used these same stars to align their creation. They watched the northern sky, tracked the circumpolar stars that never set, and somehow translated those observations into the cardinal alignments that still impress surveyors today. No textbooks explained the method. No blueprints survived to show their calculations. They figured it out and achieved it, and then the specific techniques apparently vanished, leaving later civilizations to puzzle over how it was done. You're standing on a dock in the Bay of Naples, somewhere around 100 BCE. Behind you, Mount Vesuvius rises against a clear sky, not yet infamous for the destruction it will rain down on Pompeii. In front of you, workers are building a breakwater that will still be standing 2,000 years from now, long after most modern concrete structures have crumbled into rubble. They're mixing volcanic ash with lime and seawater, creating a material the Romans called opus caementicium. You watch as they pour this mixture into wooden forms submerged in the Mediterranean. The process looks simple enough. Mix, pour, wait. But that mixture will harden underwater into a substance tougher than anything Portland cement can produce in a marine environment. Modern concrete in seawater faces a constant battle. Salt infiltrates the material, attacking the internal structure. Steel reinforcement bars rust and expand, cracking the concrete from within. Wave action erodes surfaces. Chemical reactions weaken bonds. Most modern marine structures need repair or replacement within decades. The Romans built docks and harbours that laugh at ocean storms for millennia. The secret apparently lies in that volcanic ash, specifically the type from Pozzuoli near Naples. When mixed with lime and seawater, something happens at the molecular level that modern scientists are still working out. The seawater doesn't weaken the concrete, it actually makes it stronger. Salt water triggers chemical reactions that grow new minerals within the concrete structure, filling gaps and creating an increasingly dense interlocked network of crystals. You watch a researcher in the present day examining a sample of Roman harbour concrete under an electron microscope. She's looking at crystals of aluminum topomerite, a rare mineral that forms slowly in the presence of seawater. These crystals reinforce the concrete, growing denser over centuries. The process resembles how a pearl forms in an oyster, layer by patient layer, irritant transformed into strength. Modern concrete aims for fast strength development. Mix it, pour it, and in 28 days you've got most of your final strength. Quick project completion, fast return on investment. Roman concrete took years or even decades to reach its full strength, but it just kept getting tougher. The Romans apparently understood that patience produces different results than haste. The recipe seems straightforward. Volcanic ash from specific deposits, lime from heated limestone, seawater and aggregate. Scientists have analysed the proportions, examined the minerals and identified the chemical processes. Yet attempts to recreate Roman concrete that performs as well in seawater have proven frustratingly difficult. The volcanic ash from Pozzuoli is depleted. Alternative volcanic ashes don't behave quite the same way. Modern lime production uses different temperatures than Roman kilns. Small variations in the process produce large differences in performance. You walk along the ancient harbour at Portus, Rome's main seaport. The massive curved breakwater still rises from the water, still protecting what remains of the harbour. 2,000 years of storms, earthquakes and chemical assault haven't brought it down. Parts of the structure were deliberately demolished for building materials in later centuries, but what remains is as solid as ever. The Romans built thousands of structures with their concrete: harbours, aqueducts, buildings, bridges, and the Pantheon's magnificent dome. Each structure used variations of the basic recipe, adjusted for local conditions and specific needs. The dome of the Pantheon shows particularly clever engineering. The concrete changes composition from bottom to top, with denser, heavier aggregates at the base, and lighter pumice toward the apex. The builders understood load distribution and material properties without the benefit of structural engineering textbooks. Modern researchers scratch their heads over the details. How did Roman builders know which volcanic ash to use? How did they determine the right proportions for different applications? How did they train workers to maintain quality control across the vast empire? No detailed recipes survived. No technical manuals explained the process. Later civilizations knew the Romans had excellent concrete, but the specific knowledge of how to make it apparently faded away. By the Middle Ages, European builders had shifted to stonemasonry and brick. Roman concrete techniques were largely forgotten, surviving mainly in references to ancient structures rather than as living knowledge. When modern Portland cement was developed in the 19th century, it became the standard despite its poor performance in marine environments. The ancient solution sat there in harbours around the Mediterranean, demonstrating superior durability that nobody quite knew how to replicate. You think about the implications. The Romans created a material that gets stronger with age, that uses seawater as an asset rather than a threat, and that requires no steel reinforcement or exotic chemicals. They did this without understanding chemistry at the molecular level, without electron microscopes or X-ray diffraction analysis. They observed, experimented, refined their methods, and passed the knowledge through craft traditions. Current research projects are attempting to recreate Roman concrete for modern use. The environmental benefits would be substantial. Using volcanic ash and seawater reduces the need for Portland cement, which accounts for about 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. If we could build marine structures that last 2,000 years instead of 50, the resource savings would be enormous. But the Romans didn't concern themselves with carbon footprints. They just wanted harbours that wouldn't fall apart. The volcanic ash holds particular interest. The ancient sources the Romans used, especially around Pozzuoli and the volcanic region near Rome, contain specific minerals that react in particular ways with lime and seawater. Other volcanic ashes from around the world have different mineral compositions and don't perform the same way. The Romans didn't travel far to find special ingredients. They used what was locally available and developed techniques suited to those materials. This points to another aspect of ancient innovation that modern approaches sometimes miss: working with what's at hand rather than seeking ideal materials. The Romans couldn't order synthetic additives or import specialized ingredients from across the globe. They observed their environment, experimented with local materials, and developed solutions that matched their resources. The result happened to outlast anything modern technology has yet produced for marine construction. You watch waves lap against ancient concrete, each surge depositing minerals that make the structure fractionally stronger. The process continues today, 2 millennia after the builders died, their names forgotten, their techniques partially understood. The concrete doesn't care about historical recognition. It just keeps getting tougher, molecule by patient molecule, proof that sometimes slow chemistry beats fast engineering. You're in a workshop in medieval Damascus, sometime around 1100 CE. The heat from the forge makes the air shimmer, and a smith is carefully tending a crucible, filled with a mixture that will eventually become the finest steel blade of its era. The sword he's making will be able to slice through a falling silk scarf, yet remain flexible enough to bend without breaking. Its surface will show distinctive watery patterns, ripples and swirls that mark it as genuine Damascus steel. No modern smith can reliably recreate it. The pattern on Damascus steel isn't decorative etching or surface treatment. It's the visible expression of the metal's internal structure. Carbide nanotubes and bands of cementite creating variations in hardness at microscopic scales. These patterns contribute to the blade's legendary sharpness and durability. Somehow, medieval smiths created nanotechnology in their crucibles centuries before microscopes could reveal what they were making. The story becomes more puzzling when you realise that Damascus steel wasn't made in Damascus. The city was a trading centre where these blades were sold, but the steel itself came from India, produced through a technique called wootz steel making. Indian smiths heated iron with carbon-rich materials in sealed clay crucibles. The exact heating process, the carbon sources and the cooling rates, all of these factors influenced the final product, and getting them wrong meant the difference between extraordinary steel and ordinary iron. You watch the medieval smith examining his blade, testing its flexibility and checking the edge. He learned his craft through years of apprenticeship, watching masters work, gradually absorbing the subtle cues that indicate when the metal is ready. The knowledge was passed through demonstration and experience rather than written formulas. You either developed the feel for it, or you made inferior blades. Modern metallurgists analysing Damascus steel find structures they wouldn't expect to see from medieval technology. The carbon content forms into precise patterns, aligned and organised at scales that seem to require controlled processes unavailable to ancient smiths. Yet there the structures are, visible under electron microscopes, creating the mechanical properties that made these blades legendary. The secret apparently lay in the ore itself. Deposits in southern India contain trace amounts of certain elements, tungsten, vanadium, and chromium, that acted as catalysts during the smelting process. These elements influenced how carbon organised within the steel's crystalline structure. The smiths didn't know about trace elements or catalytic effects. They knew that ore from specific mines produced better steel, and they guarded those sources carefully. The manufacturing process disappeared around 1750 CE. Several factors probably contributed to its loss. The specific ore deposits became depleted or were exhausted. Trade routes shifted, political changes disrupted established craft networks, and demand changed as firearms replaced swords. Whatever the reasons, the last generation of smiths who knew the complete process died without successfully passing on their knowledge, despite the steel's legendary reputation and high value. Modern attempts to recreate Damascus steel have succeeded in producing similar patterns and some of the mechanical properties, but researchers still debate whether they've captured the exact ancient process. Creating superficially similar results doesn't necessarily mean you've rediscovered the original method. The ancients might have taken a completely different path to reach their destination, using techniques and intuitions that seem obvious only once you know them. You think about the experimental process those ancient smiths must have undertaken. They couldn't analyse the results at a molecular level or measure carbon content precisely. They worked through trial and error, guided by results they could observe, how well the blade held an edge, how it performed in combat, and how the patterns looked on the finished surface. Generations of smiths refined the process, each master adding small improvements or adaptations. The economic value of Damascus steel drove its development and protected its secrets. A blade of genuine Damascus steel costs considerably more than ordinary swords. Smiths who could reliably produce high-quality results enjoyed significant advantages in the marketplace. This created incentives for secrecy and for careful selection of apprentices. Knowledge became proprietary, shared within family workshops or closely guarded craft guilds. This same economic value makes the loss of the technique more puzzling. If Damascus steel commanded premium prices, why didn't more smiths learn to make it? Why didn't wealthy patrons fund efforts to preserve the knowledge when it became clear that the techniques were endangered? The historical record doesn't provide clear answers. Perhaps the smiths themselves didn't fully understand the role of specific ore sources, or the decline happened gradually enough that no single generation recognized the crisis until it was too late. You examine a genuine Damascus blade in a museum collection, its surface showing the characteristic patterns that mark it as authentic. The patterns aren't uniform. They vary from blade to blade, region to region, and even within a single sword's length. This variation suggests that smiths were adapting their techniques to specific circumstances, working with variations in quality, and adjusting their processes accordingly. They developed sophisticated quality control without the benefit of modern testing equipment, judging results through performance and appearance. Current research into historical Damascus steel has revealed surprising details. The carbon nanotubes found in the steel form through a self-assembly process during cooling. The trace elements in the ore seed the formation of these structures, but the smith's control of temperature and cooling rates determines the final patterns. It's a delicate balance, and apparently medieval smiths learned to manipulate variables they couldn't directly measure or even conceptually understand. This points to a broader pattern in ancient innovation. Solutions that work without complete theoretical understanding. The smiths knew that certain processes produce certain results. They refined those processes through experience. The underlying atomic scale mechanisms remained invisible and unknown, but practical knowledge proved sufficient to create exceptional products. The modern metallurgist studying Damascus steel has advantages the ancient smith lacked: electron microscopes, spectroscopy, precise temperature control, and pure ingredients. Yet reproducing the ancient results proves frustratingly difficult. The metallurgist knows too much, perhaps, seeing complexities that the ancient smith never considered. Sometimes ignorance of the details allows focus on the results that matter. You're on a boat off the Greek island of Antikythera in October 1900, watching sponge divers surface from a shipwreck they've just discovered. One diver emerges talking about dead bodies on the seafloor, corpses that turn out to be bronze statues from an ancient cargo ship. Among the marble sculptures, pottery and bronze figures, someone will eventually notice a corroded lump that doesn't look like much of anything at all. That corroded lump will turn out to be the most complex mechanical device from the ancient world ever discovered. A machine so sophisticated that nothing comparable appears in the historical record for another 1,000 years. It's a portable mechanical computer, built around 100 BCE, designed to calculate and display astronomical information, including the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, the phase of the moon, eclipse predictions, and the dates of the Olympic Games. You watch as conservators in the present day carefully X-ray the corroded mass, revealing gears within gears, differential systems, and inscriptions too small to read with the naked eye. The device contains at least 30 bronze gears, possibly more that have corroded away. The gears are cut with precision, their teeth evenly spaced, and their axles aligned with remarkable accuracy. This thing was built by someone who understood mechanical engineering at a level you wouldn't expect to see until Renaissance clockmakers started building astronomical clocks. The front dial displays the Egyptian calendar and the Greek zodiac. Turn a crank on the side and pointers move across the dials, showing how the celestial bodies move through the sky. The back of the device features 2 spiral dials, one tracking the Metonic cycle of 19 years used to predict eclipses, another showing the 4-year cycle of the Olympic and other Panhellenic Games. Here's where it gets interesting. The mechanism doesn't just show the positions of celestial bodies, it accounts for the moon's elliptical orbit through an ingenious gear system that speeds up and slows down the moon's pointer to match the moon's actual varying speed across the sky. This requires understanding orbital mechanics that wouldn't be formally described for centuries. Somebody knew that the moon moves faster at some points in its orbit than others, and figured out how to model that variation with bronze gears. The gears themselves reveal sophisticated manufacturing techniques. They're cut precisely, with triangular teeth that mesh smoothly. The gear ratios calculate astronomical cycles with impressive accuracy. The mechanism's Metonic cycle dial predicts eclipses using the 19-year pattern that ancient astronomers recognized by careful observation. The designers knew their astronomy and possessed the mechanical skill to translate that knowledge into a working machine. No ancient text describes anything like the Antikythera mechanism. Greek and Roman authors mention simpler astronomical instruments, sundials, celestial spheres, and water clocks, but nothing approaching this device's complexity. Either such machines were so rare that nobody bothered to describe them in surviving texts, or the knowledge of how to build them vanished early enough that later authors didn't know what had been lost. You think about the engineering challenges involved in creating this device. Someone had to design the gear train, calculating the ratios needed to model various astronomical cycles. Someone had to manufacture the gears to sufficient precision that they'd mesh properly and turn smoothly. Someone had to assemble dozens of components inside a wooden case no larger than a shoebox. And someone had to inscribe the detailed instructions on the device's surfaces, explaining what each dial showed and how to interpret the results. The project required multiple types of expertise working in concert: astronomical knowledge, mechanical design skill, metalworking ability, and enough mathematical understanding to translate celestial observations into gear ratios. This suggests the existence of a sophisticated technical culture, probably centered in Rhodes or Alexandria, capable of supporting specialized craftsmen working on complex projects. Modern researchers have built reconstructions of the Antikythera mechanism based on CT scans and detailed analysis of the original fragments. The reconstructions work. Turn the crank and the gears rotate smoothly. The pointers track across the dials, and the predictions match ancient astronomical observations. Building the reconstructions required modern precision tools and computer-aided design. The ancient makers used hand tools and geometric construction techniques, yet achieved comparable results. The device's existence raises uncomfortable questions about the history of technology. If Greek craftsmen could build such sophisticated mechanisms around 100 BCE, why don't we have more of them? Why don't Roman authors describe astronomical computers in their surveys of useful devices? Why did the technology apparently vanish, only to be slowly reinvented in medieval Europe over 1,000 years later? Possible answers include the device's likely high cost. Such a machine would have been affordable only to wealthy patrons, limiting the number ever made. The materials used would have been valuable even after the mechanism's purpose was forgotten, encouraging people to melt down damaged devices for their bronze. And mechanical devices, unlike stone buildings or pottery, rarely survive long in corrosive marine or burial environments. We might be seeing the one example that happened to end up in conditions that preserved it. Still, the Antikythera mechanism suggests that ancient technical capabilities sometimes exceeded what we'd expect based on the surviving evidence. The device wasn't crude or primitive, it was sophisticated and elegant, clearly the product of refined design rather than early experimentation. This implies a development history we can't currently trace, a series of earlier devices and improvements that led to the complex version found in the shipwreck. You examine the gear teeth under magnification, noting how precisely they're formed. The maker used a technique that ancient texts do describe: cutting gear teeth using dividing plates and careful geometric layout. The process was time-consuming but effective. You didn't need power tools or CNC machines to create precise gears, just patience, skill, and good metal. The ancient craftsmen clearly possessed all three. The inscriptions covering the mechanism's surfaces amount to an instruction manual, explaining how to use the device and what various features calculate. The text is tiny, requiring good eyesight or optical aids to read comfortably. This raises another question. Did ancient craftsmen have access to magnifying lenses? Roman glassmaking certainly produced vessels and objects with optical properties. Could someone have realized that a water-filled glass sphere acts as a magnifying glass? The evidence is indirect but suggestive. The Antikythera mechanism stands as proof that ancient people could be as smart and capable as anyone living today. They lacked our accumulated knowledge and our power tools, but they didn't lack intelligence or ingenuity. Given sufficient motivation, in this case the desire to predict celestial events for navigation, astrology, or agricultural planning, They developed solutions that look remarkably modern in their sophistication. You're standing in southeastern Turkey at a site called Göbekli Tepe, looking at stone pillars carved with intricate reliefs of animals. These aren't simple scratches or rough shapes. They're detailed images of foxes, lions, bulls, scorpions and vultures, carved with skill and artistic vision. The pillars stand in circular arrangements, some of them weighing 16 tons, carefully shaped and positioned. Here's what makes your head spin. These structures were built around 9,500 BCE, more than 11,000 years ago. The people who built them were hunter-gatherers, supposedly living in small mobile bands, not yet practicing agriculture, and not yet living in permanent settlements. According to the traditional narrative of human development, you need settled agriculture before you can build monuments. You need food surpluses to support specialist craftsmen. You need complex social organisation to coordinate large construction projects. Göbekli Tepe suggests we've got the story backward. The site covers roughly 90,000 square metres, with multiple circular structures featuring these massive T-shaped pillars. Each circle took years to build, and when one was complete, the builders carefully buried it and started a new one nearby. They did this repeatedly over many centuries, creating layer upon layer of monuments, filling in the old to make way for the new. You watch archaeologists carefully excavating one of the structures. The workmanship shows surprising sophistication. The T-shaped pillars were quarried from bedrock, shaped with stone tools, transported to the site, and erected in precisely planned positions. The circular walls connecting the pillars were built with carefully fitted stones. The whole thing shows design consistency and construction planning that you wouldn't expect from people who supposedly spent most of their time hunting gazelles and gathering wild grain. The animal carvings on the pillars aren't random decorations. They seem to follow symbolic patterns, possibly representing constellations or seasonal markers or mythological narratives we can't fully decode. Some pillars show human arms and hands, suggesting the stones might represent stylized human figures. Whatever the meaning, creating these carvings required skilled stoneworkers spending considerable time on each pillar. Modern experiments in stoneworking reveal how labour-intensive this would have been. Using replicas of prehistoric tools, flint blades and stone hammers, researchers have attempted to carve limestone similar to what the Göbekli Tepe builders used. Creating a few inches of carved relief takes hours of careful work. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe feature yards of intricate carving. Someone invested enormous effort into these monuments. This raises the obvious question: why? If you're a hunter-gatherer living in small mobile groups, why invest years of labour-building monuments? Where did the workers come from? How did you feed them during construction? Traditional archaeology assumes monument building requires settled farming communities because you need reliable food surpluses to support people not engaged in food production. The answer might be that we've misunderstood the relationship between monuments and agriculture. Perhaps building these ritual sites actually motivated the development of agriculture rather than the other way around. If you need to feed large groups of people gathering for festivals or ceremonies at places like Göbekli Tepe, you've got a strong incentive to develop more intensive food production methods. Maybe religion and ritual drove agricultural development, not vice versa. You examine the animal bones found at the site. Thousands of them, mostly from wild gazelles and aurochs. The bones show butchering marks, evidence of massive feasts. People were gathering here in large numbers, eating together, and probably participating in rituals or ceremonies we can only guess at. These gatherings required organisation and planning. Someone had to coordinate the hunts, process the animals, and manage the cooking. This level of social organisation supposedly came after agriculture developed, not before. The construction techniques add more mysteries. The pillars were quarried from bedrock outcrops using techniques that left clear marks in the stone. The builders created channels around each pillar blank, gradually undercutting it until they could break it free from the bedrock. Then they had to transport pillars weighing up to 16 tons to the construction site. No evidence of wheels or draft animals exist from this period. They likely used log rollers and human muscle power, which means dozens of people working in coordination. Erecting the pillars required engineering knowledge we usually associate with later civilizations. Each pillar stands in a socket carved into the bedrock floor. The socket had to be positioned correctly for the pillar to stand vertical once raised. Lifting a 16-ton stone into position with Stone Age technology required levers, ramps, rope, and careful planning. Getting it wrong could kill people and destroy the pillar. They got it right repeatedly. The site's deliberate burial adds another layer of mystery. The builders didn't abandon these structures when they moved on. They carefully filled them with rubble and soil, preserving them completely buried. This took considerable effort. Moving enough fill material to cover these large structures required organised labour. Why bury them instead of simply leaving them standing? The act suggests the structures had specific purposes that were completed, or that the burial itself held ritual significance. Modern excavations have revealed only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe. Ground-penetrating radar shows multiple additional circular structures still buried. Archaeologists estimate that uncovering and studying the entire site could take decades. Each new section excavated reveals similar sophistication and raises similar questions about how pre-agricultural people accomplished such construction. You think about the social implications. Building Göbekli Tepe required cooperation among multiple groups. No single hunter-gatherer band could have provided enough labour. People from different bands had to gather, work together on shared projects, and maintain that cooperation over generations. This suggests complex social arrangements, systems of obligation, reciprocity, and shared beliefs that traditionally aren't attributed to hunter-gatherer societies. This site lacks evidence of domestic structures. Nobody lived at Göbekli Tepe permanently. People came, worked, feasted, performed rituals, and left. It was a special place, set apart from daily life. The investment in creating and maintaining such a place suggests it served important social functions, bringing groups together, affirming shared identities, and marking significant events. The monuments became focal points for social organisation. Recent discoveries at sites near Göbekli Tepe show that it wasn't unique. Other stone pillar sites from the same period have been found scattered across the region. This suggests a whole culture of monument building among pre-agricultural peoples, a practice we never suspected existed until Göbekli Tepe was excavated. How many other aspects of prehistoric life have we misunderstood due to lack of evidence? The traditional timeline of human development places agriculture around 10,000 BCE in the Fertile Crescent, with monument building developing several thousand years later once agricultural societies became established. Göbekli Tepe flips this narrative, showing sophisticated monument building before agriculture took hold. Either the timeline needs revision, or our understanding of what motivates and enables monument construction needs rethinking. You're standing on the walls of Constantinople in 678 CE, watching an Arab fleet approach the city. The Byzantine capital has withstood sieges before, but this one looks serious. Hundreds of ships carrying thousands of warriors intent on conquering the richest city in Christendom. Then you see the Byzantine dromons sail out to meet the enemy, and everything changes. From bronze tubes mounted on the Byzantine ships, a liquid erupts in streams of flame that ignite on contact with the Arab vessels. The fire spreads across wooden hulls and doesn't extinguish when hit by waves. In fact, water seems to make it burn more fiercely. The Arab sailors panic as their ships become floating pyres. The Byzantine dromons systematically work through the enemy fleet, spraying fire from their tubes, turning the sea battle into a massacre. This is Greek fire, and nobody's entirely sure what it was made of. The Byzantines guarded the secret of Greek fire more carefully than perhaps any military technology in history. The formula was known to the ruling family and a handful of trusted technicians. Production happened in secure workshops. Using Greek fire required specially designed ships with protected bronze tubes for projecting the substance. For centuries, this weapon gave the Byzantine navy a decisive advantage in naval warfare. Modern historians and chemists have proposed numerous theories about Greek fire's composition. Crude oil features in most hypotheses, since petroleum naturally seeps to the surface in several locations around the Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean. But crude oil alone doesn't match the described properties of Greek fire, which supposedly ignited spontaneously, burned on water, and couldn't be extinguished with water. Adding naphtha, a volatile petroleum fraction, gets closer to the mark. Naphtha burns intensely and water won't put it out. But naphtha doesn't ignite spontaneously at normal temperatures, and historical accounts suggest Greek fire sometimes did. Some researchers propose adding quicklime to the mixture. Quicklime reacts violently with water, generating heat that could ignite flammable petroleum components. A mixture of naphtha, petroleum, sulfur and quicklime might produce something with properties matching Greek fire's description. You watch a modern chemist attempting to recreate Greek fire in controlled laboratory conditions. She's mixing petroleum derivatives with various additives, testing each mixture for the properties described in Byzantine sources. Some combinations burn impressively but require external ignition. Others ignite spontaneously, but don't burn with the intensity described. Getting all the properties right in one mixture proves elusive. The delivery system adds complications. Byzantine ships used bronze tubes, essentially early flamethrowers, to project Greek fire at enemy vessels. This required pressure to force the liquid through the tube and onto the target. Some historians suggest the Byzantines used force pumps, creating pressure through mechanical pistons. Others propose that the mixture itself generated pressure through chemical reactions. The tubes were apparently carefully aimed, suggesting trained operators developed skill in projecting the fire effectively. Greek fire served as a deterrent as much as a weapon. Enemy fleets knew the Byzantines possessed this devastating weapon, which influenced strategic decisions. Besieging Constantinople by sea became extremely risky. The psychological impact of watching ships burn with unquenchable flames probably exceeded the weapon's actual destructive power, though that was considerable enough. The formula's secrecy became legendary. When the Byzantine princess Theophano married the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II in 972 CE, part of her dowry negotiations included an explicit understanding that she would not reveal the secrets of Greek fire to her new husband's court. The emperor himself apparently took oaths to preserve the secret, recognizing that if the formula became widely known, Byzantine naval superiority would vanish. Despite these precautions, the secret of Greek fire eventually disappeared anyway. By the early 13th century, references to Greek fire fade from Byzantine sources. The Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople in 1204 probably disrupted the secure production system. The workshops were looted, technicians scattered or killed, and the formula apparently lost in the chaos. Later, Byzantine rulers attempted to recreate Greek fire but never achieved the same results. The loss had strategic consequences. Without Greek fire, the Byzantine navy lost its decisive advantage over rival naval powers. Venice and Genoa, with their newer ship designs and better seamanship, gradually dominated Mediterranean naval warfare. The Byzantines still built impressive ships, but they'd lost the weapon that once made their fleet terrifying. You think about the challenges involved in developing Greek fire. The original creators had to experiment with various flammable substances, discovering which combinations produced desired properties. They did this without modern chemistry, without understanding molecular structures or chemical reactions at a theoretical level. They worked through empirical observation, mix this with that, see what happens, and refine the results. Some experiments probably went spectacularly wrong, creating explosions or uncontrollable fires. The weapon's effectiveness depended on accurate targeting and favourable wind conditions. Spraying flaming liquid at enemy ships works well when the wind blows from your stern toward the enemy. If the wind shifts, you risk setting your own ship aflame. Byzantine naval commanders had to understand tactics that maximised Greek fire's advantages while minimising the risks to their own vessels. Modern militaries have analysed Greek fire as a historical case study in secret weapons development and security. The Byzantines maintained operational security for centuries through compartmentalization, keeping knowledge restricted to small groups, ensuring production happened in secure locations, and making the weapons use dependent on specialized training and equipment. Once that security structure collapsed, the secret couldn't be recovered. Alternative theories about Greek fire keep emerging as historians find new references in obscure texts or chemists attempt new experimental reconstructions. Some propose that the Byzantines had multiple formulations, adapting the mixture for different tactical situations. Others suggest that Greek fire became a generic term for various incendiary weapons, not all of which use the same formula. The historical sources don't provide enough detail to resolve these debates definitively. You watch flames reflected on water, thinking about all the knowledge that humans have developed and then lost. Greek fire represents a specific case, a formula forgotten when the social structure preserving it collapsed. But similar losses probably happened countless times in history. Craft techniques, medical treatments, agricultural methods, architectural tricks, all kinds of practical knowledge that didn't get written down or whose written descriptions were too vague to recreate the original discovery. You're in a museum storage room, examining objects that don't quite fit the expected timeline of technological development. Not the flashy headline grabbers that fuel conspiracy theories, but the quiet anomalies that make archaeologists scratch their heads and reach for their reference books. Surprisingly, sophisticated items found in contexts that suggest people knew more than we thought they did. The first object in your hand looks like a simple clay pot, but when you strike it gently, it rings like a bell. A clear, sustained tone that suggests remarkable symmetry and uniform wall thickness. This isn't a wheel-thrown pot from an established ceramic tradition. It's from a site dated to when people supposedly just figured out that heating clay makes it hard. Yet someone created this pot with acoustic properties that modern potters would struggle to duplicate without careful measurement and practice. You set down the ringing pot and pick up a small bronze mirror from Han Dynasty China. The front shows your reflection in polished metal, but flip it over and examine the decorated back in bright light, and something weird happens. You can see the decorations from the back appearing ghost-like in the reflected image on the front. The metal is solid bronze, no tricks with transparent materials. Yet somehow the casting process created variations in thickness and stress patterns that make the solid bronze act like it's partly transparent. How did ancient mirror makers discover this trick? Did they stumble on it by accident and then figure out how to control it? The techniques apparently vanished after the Han Dynasty, leaving modern metallurgists to puzzle over how it was done. Next to the mirror sits a small piece of stained glass from a 12th century church window, the deep ruby red that medieval glaziers achieved by adding gold to the glass mixture. But here's the thing, the colour doesn't come from gold dissolved uniformly in the glass. Modern analysis reveals that medieval glaziers accidentally created gold nanoparticles suspended in the glass matrix. These nanoparticles scatter light in specific ways, producing the rich red colour that became prized in church windows. The glaziers didn't know about nanoparticles. They knew that adding gold in a certain way produced beautiful red glass, so they did it. You think about how many discoveries hide in plain sight. Their mechanisms unknown to their makers, but their results highly valued. The medieval glazier who figured out how to make ruby glass probably experimented with various additives and heating schedules, keeping careful mental notes about what worked. The knowledge was passed through apprenticeship, master to student, with the understanding, heat it this long, add gold like this, and you'll get this colour. The underlying physics went undiscovered for centuries. Moving along the storage shelves, you find a chunk of ancient glass from Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 years old. It's opaque blue, coloured with copper compounds, but under certain lighting conditions it shows an internal structure that suggests the glassmaker understood something about controlled cooling rates and crystallization. Cooling molten glass too quickly makes it brittle. Cooling it too slowly allows large crystals to form, making it cloudy. Somewhere in between lies the sweet spot for strong clear glass. Mesopotamian glassmakers found that sweet spot through experience, producing glass that survived 4 millennia. The shelf also holds a peculiar bronze implement from ancient Egypt, a tool whose purpose archaeologists debated for years. The shape suggested various uses: surgical instrument, cosmetic applicator, and specialized craft tool. Eventually someone noticed that the bronze had an unusual composition for Egyptian work, with higher tin content than typical. This made it springier and less prone to permanent deformation. Testing revealed that the tool functioned like a precision spring clamp, holding small objects steady during delicate work. Someone engineered an alloy for specific mechanical properties without benefit of metallurgical theory. You pick up a small vial containing purple dye extracted from ancient cloth fragments. This is Tyrian purple, the famous dye made from sea snails by ancient Phoenician dyers. Producing 1 gram of this dye required processing thousands of snails. The exact process involved extracting specific glands, combining the secretions from multiple snail species, and exposing the mixture to sunlight while controlling pH. Getting it wrong meant worthless brown sludge. Getting it right meant a colour-fast purple dye worth more than gold. The dye makers developed this complex biochemical process through observation and experimentation, without understanding enzymes or chemical structures. A nearby box contains fragments of ancient Indian woot steel, the source material for Damascus blades. You examine the metal under magnification, seeing the characteristic patterns that mark it as high-quality steel. But analysis shows something unexpected. The carbon content varies in precise patterns throughout the metal structure. This isn't random distribution, but organized segregation at microscales. Somehow, the Indian steelmakers' heating and cooling processes created predictable internal structures that modern metallurgy recognizes as quite sophisticated. The artifacts keep revealing surprises. A Roman glass vessel shows color-changing properties, appearing green in reflected light but red when light shines through it. The effect comes from gold and silver nanoparticles suspended in the glass matrix, nanotechnology created by people who had no concept of nanoscale engineering. They just knew that adding certain materials in certain ways produced dramatic optical effects. You examine a piece of ancient concrete from an aqueduct, noting how the aggregate is carefully graded. Larger stones at the bottom, smaller toward the top. This improved the concrete's strength and durability, matching principles that modern engineers recognize as sound practice. The ancient builders didn't have structural engineering textbooks. They observed that graduated aggregate worked better and used that knowledge. A small bronze gear from an ancient mechanism shows surprisingly accurate tooth spacing. Someone cut those teeth using hand tools and careful measurement, achieving precision that modern machinists would need specialized equipment to match. The gear represents hours of patient work by a craftsperson whose name we'll never know, creating a component for some larger device that's long since vanished. Each artifact tells a story of a knowledge developed through observation and refined through practice. The makers didn't need scientific theories to create effective solutions. They needed careful attention to materials and processes, willingness to experiment, and a good memory for what worked and what didn't. This practical knowledge allowed them to achieve results that still impress modern experts working with advanced analytical tools. You think about the disconnect between theoretical understanding and practical capability. Modern scientists can explain why ruby glass gets its color from gold nanoparticles, but that explanation doesn't automatically make you able to produce beautiful red glass. The medieval glazier couldn't explain the mechanism, but could consistently create the desired result. Sometimes practical mastery precedes theoretical understanding by centuries. You're sitting in a modern research laboratory, watching scientists analyze ancient artifacts using equipment that would seem like magic to the original makers. Electron microscopes reveal structures invisible to the human eye. Mass spectrometers identify elements present in parts per million. X-ray diffraction maps crystalline structures. Computer simulations model stress and strain distributions. Despite all this analytical power, definitive answers remain elusive. The scientist at the next bench is studying samples from Roman concrete, trying to understand exactly how the material achieves its remarkable durability. She's identified most of the chemical reactions involved. She understands the role of volcanic ash and seawater. She can describe the crystalline structures that form over time. But when her team tries to recreate Roman concrete using this knowledge, the results come close, but don't quite match the 2,000-year-old original. This happens repeatedly across different ancient technologies. Modern researchers understand more than ancient craftspeople did about the underlying mechanisms, yet the ancients sometimes achieved results that remain difficult to replicate. The disconnect suggests that practical knowledge and theoretical understanding don't perfectly overlap. You can understand the physics without mastering the craft, or master the craft without understanding the physics. You think about the pyramid builders, who achieved incredible precision without theodolites or laser levels. They couldn't have explained force vectors or structural load distribution using modern engineering vocabulary. But they clearly understood these concepts at an intuitive level, gained through observation and experience. Their knowledge was embodied in practice rather than codified in theory. The research scientist examining Damascus steel fragments faces similar puzzles. Modern metallurgy provides detailed understanding of how carbon and trace elements influence steel's properties. Electron microscopy reveals the internal structures that create the famous patterns. Yet attempts to recreate Damascus steel using modern equipment produce similar looking but not quite identical results. Something about the ancient process, perhaps the variation in temperature during forging, or the specific cooling rates, or subtle differences in trace element ratios, created properties that remain difficult to precisely reproduce. This doesn't mean ancient people had secret knowledge or lost wisdom. It suggests they developed practical expertise through methods different from modern scientific approaches. They worked through iteration and refinement, keeping what worked and discarding what didn't. Generations of craftspeople accumulated knowledge, each adding small improvements. The process produced sophisticated results without requiring theoretical understanding. You watch someone attempt to cut stone using replica copper tools and sand abrasives. The technique works, stone gets cut and surfaces get smoothed. But achieving the precision seen in ancient Egyptian work requires practice, patience, and attention to subtle feedback that only comes through experience. The researcher has read every available source on ancient stoneworking techniques. He's analysed tool marks under magnification. He understands the theory. But his hands don't yet know what the ancient stonecutter's hands knew after years of daily practice. Modern culture tends to privilege theoretical knowledge over practical skill. We write down explanations, create models, and derive equations. This approach produces powerful results and allows rapid transmission of ideas. But some knowledge resists codification. Try writing detailed instructions for riding a bicycle, explaining balance, steering, and pedaling coordination in a way that would let someone who'd never seen a bicycle learn to ride one. The task proves surprisingly difficult. Some knowledge lives in practice motion rather than written description. Ancient craftspeople passed their skills through demonstration and apprenticeship. The apprentice watched the master work, attempted similar tasks under supervision, and gradually developed a feel for the materials and processes. This transmission method kept the knowledge alive as long as the craft tradition continued. But when that tradition broke, whether through economic changes, political disruption, or shifts in demand, the practical knowledge could vanish quickly, even if written descriptions survived. You examine a stack of ancient technical texts, noting how vague they often are about crucial details. A Roman author describes making concrete but doesn't specify exact proportions or explain how to judge when the mixture is ready. He assumes the reader already knows these basics through practical experience. The text serves as a reminder and reference, not as a complete instruction manual. This makes sense for contemporary readers, but frustrates modern researchers trying to recreate ancient techniques from textual sources alone. The mystery of ancient innovations isn't really about lost secrets or forgotten super science. It's about the difference between knowing how and knowing that, between practical mastery and theoretical understanding. Ancient craftspeople knew how to achieve specific results without necessarily knowing why those methods worked. Modern researchers often know why things work without having mastered the practical skills to actually do them. This suggests humility about both ancient capabilities and modern knowledge. Ancient people weren't primitive. They were fully capable humans solving problems with available resources. Their solutions sometimes show sophistication that challenges assumptions about technological progress. At the same time, modern analytical tools provide genuine insights that ancient craftspeople lacked. Neither perspective is complete without the other. You watch concrete slowly gaining strength in a test cylinder, thinking about the Roman harbour at Portus, still standing after 2 millennia. The ancient builders couldn't have written equations describing the chemical reactions strengthening their concrete. They knew that certain mixtures, properly prepared, produced durable structures. That knowledge sufficed for the task at hand. The scientist working on Damascus steel carefully heats a sample in a controlled furnace, monitoring temperature with precision instruments. She's attempting to recreate the exact thermal history that Indian smiths produced in their crucibles through empirical methods. Her approach seems backwards, using advanced equipment to recreate results that were originally achieved with simple tools. But the scientific method requires understanding mechanisms, not just copying techniques. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about any particular lost technology, but about respecting multiple ways of knowing. Practical experience generates knowledge that scientific analysis enriches but doesn't completely replace. The pyramid builder's eye judging whether a stone is level contributes something different from the surveyor's transit reading of exact angles. Both approaches have value. Both produce knowledge. You step outside the laboratory as day fades to evening. The ancient world and modern world feel less distant than usual tonight. People in both eras observe, experiment, refine techniques, and create solutions to problems. The tools differ, the theoretical frameworks differ, but the underlying human capacities remain constant. Given sufficient motivation and opportunity, people figure things out. The unsolved mysteries of ancient innovations might eventually yield to persistent research, or some might remain puzzles, reminders that human knowledge is always partial and provisional. Either way, the ancient artifacts themselves endure. Concrete standing in seawater, pyramids aligned to true north, glass containing accidental nanotechnology. Proof that clever people have always found ways to accomplish impressive things with whatever resources their world provided.